Thanks, Ashley. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for everyone who's joined us online. Thank you for your patience. We've had a few technical issues here, but I think we've got them resolved. So welcome to our second hybrid BCDC Design Review Board meeting. We appreciate your patience as we navigate this new meeting format. My name is Jacinta McCann. I'm the chair of the BCDC's Design Review Board. I'm located here at the Metro Centre in San Francisco, and our meeting will include participants who are joining both in presence here and also those participating online. Quite a challenge for our team here of BCDC staff, and I just want to say a big call out to you right now for the great work you're doing. So we'll start with a roll call. Ashley, if you could call the roll.
Chair McCann.
Present.
Vice Chair String.
Present.
Board Member Battaglio.
Present.
Board Member Leader.
Present.
Board Member Pellegrini.
Present.
Board Member Wolfram.
Present.
Thanks, Ashley. We now have a quorum present, so we are duly constituted to conduct business. I want to next share with you some instructions on how we can best participate in this meeting so that it runs as smoothly as possible. First, everyone, please make sure that you have your microphones or your phones muted to avoid background noise. For board members, if you have a webcam, please make sure that it's on so that everyone can see you. For members of the public, if you would like to speak during a public comment period that's part of an agenda item, you will need to do so in one of two ways. First, if you are attending on the Zoom platform, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. If you are new to Zoom and you joined our meeting using the Zoom application, click the hand at the bottom of your screen. The hand should turn blue when it's raised. The second way, if you are joining our meeting via phone, you must press *9 on your keypad to raise or lower your hand or to make a comment, and *6 to mute or unmute your phone. We will call on individuals who have raised their hands in the order that they are raised during the public comment period for each project. After you are called on, you will be unmuted so that you can share your comments. Please state your name and affiliation at the beginning of your remarks. Remember, you have a limit of 3 minutes to speak on an item, and we will tell you when you have 1 minute remaining. Please keep your comments respectful and focused. We are here to listen to everyone who wishes to address us, but everyone has the responsibility to act in a civil manner. We will not tolerate hate speech, threats made directly or indirectly, and/or abusive language. We will mute anyone who fails to follow these guidelines or who exceeds the established time limits without permission. For public comments, please note that we will only hear your voices. Your video will not be enabled. For members of the public attending our meeting in person in our headquarters building, I will ask you to maintain social distancing during the meeting. The board secretary will call you up to the podium for public comment. Wearing masks is optional, but it is recommended in this building. You will be asked to come up to the podium one at a time and to state your name and affiliation prior to providing your comments during the meeting. If you would like to add your contact information to the interested parties list to be notified for future meetings concerning these projects, please call or email the board secretary, Andrea Gaffney, whose contact information is on the screen, but can actually be found on the BCDC website. Now, finally, every now and then you will hear me refer to the meeting host, who is John. Our BCDC staff are acting as hosts for the meeting behind the scenes to ensure that the technology moves the meeting forward smoothly and consistently. Please be patient with us if it's needed. And now the board secretary will provide a staff update, and I just want to say before it's so wonderful to see project proponents and teams here in person. We're thrilled to have you here, thrilled to see all of the board here as well, so thank you for coming. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Chair McCann. This will be a brief update. Meeting summaries for the previous 2 meetings are still being prepared by staff and will be ready for review at the June meeting. Our next meeting will be Monday, June 13th. We will have a first review of the Oakland Estuary Park concept and master plan, and a first review of a redevelopment project at 1200 to 1340 Old Bayshore Highway in Burlingame. And that concludes the staff update. I'll answer any questions from the board, and if there are none, then we can move on to the briefing and project reviews.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Any comments, any questions from the board? Hearing none, we'll move on.
Okay. So tonight we are joined by Kevin Gardner, Burlingame Community Development Director, and Lynn Matterman, CEO of One Shoreline, the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resilience District. They will be briefing the DRB on the Burlingame Sea Level Rise Ordinance and the One Shoreline Guidelines for shoreline developments. With that, we'll turn it over to Kevin and Lynn.
We're just getting the screen on, the video screen. For anyone who's online, just ask for your patience. We're just about ready to go. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair McCann and members of the board. We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you this evening and share with you the different approaches that the City of Burlingame and One Shoreline are taking to address sea level rise as it relates to development on the city's bayfront. Before we start, I don't know if Supervisor Pine is in as an attendee, if he's here, if he's able to participate, or perhaps we'll hear from him at the end, but we do want to acknowledge the leadership that he's provided with San Mateo County in really setting the stage for the ongoing sea level rise adaptation and resiliency work. And I know Mr. Matterman will talk about that as he talks about One Shoreline as well. So what I'll talk about, I'm Kevin Gardner, Community Development Director with the City of Burlingame, and we're here to talk about the Sea Level Rise Ordinance and the regulatory structure that we have here in Burlingame. So it starts with our general plan update, which was adopted in 2019. And this was where we first started looking at sea level rise and what should the city be doing and planning for sea level rise for the next 20, 30, and more years to the end of the century. You'll see on the right, there's familiar kind of diagrams of different adaptation strategies. And then there's also a series of policies and programs related to both private development as well as public investment and how the city can adapt through new development and through public investment for rising tides. The Bayfront in Burlingame has two different land use districts. Bayfront Commercial is shown there in the red, and then the Innovation Industrial is in the purple. Bayfront Commercial is characterized by typically offices, hotels, restaurants, and also has all of the waterfront, both on the bay as well as the Anza and Burlingame lagoons. The Innovation Industrial is sometimes referred to as the inland part, and it does not have direct bayfront access. It does have some creek frontages, but is also within the FEMA mapped floodplain, so it's also important to address sea level rise in that area. The big ideas with the zoning ordinance update, these would be principles, are that new public and private infrastructure and development should be set back from the shorelines and creeks to accommodate infrastructure, and as such, it's really a land bank for the future so that there's room to do adaptation as needed over the years. It should be planned to incorporate protection infrastructure, whether that's a levee or ecotone slope or what have you. It really varies by the site, and there's many different approaches that can be utilized. It should plan for and build protection infrastructure now where possible, or provide a roadmap to the future. What we don't want is to have a lot of investment put in and then be tearing things up in a few years. So the idea is to build it now if building is happening, or plan for it so that it's easy to adapt as needed. And everything should be elevated above the current FEMA floodplain. That's a requirement, but also we wanted direction in terms of providing the best kinds of feedback and direction to development projects so they would be ready for the future as well. The ordinance is incorporated as section 2512050 in the zoning code, and that is titled Public Access, Flood and Sea Level Rise Performance Guidelines. So it's not just sea level rise, it's also the public access, which is extremely important. And then within the chapter is our sections on bay access, creek access, and then flood protection and sea level rise resilience. Regarding bay access, there's the 100-foot shoreline band, which aligns with the BCDC jurisdiction, and that is on purpose. And as mentioned, that is considered a land bank. There's a lot of room for infrastructure, but also public access, amenities, recreation, and that area needs to be reserved for the future, but also be used to, for the enjoyment of current residents and people who work in the area. Public access is based on BCDC public access guidelines, and that's codified as part of our process. It also emphasizes Bay Trail connections and improvements. It's a great opportunity whenever a new development comes along to continue stitching together that Bay Trail. And there's also regulations regarding maintenance and access so that access is provided in perpetuity. Creek access, you can see in the little inset, some of our creeks could use a little love and attention, so this would be a great opportunity to provide buffer zones, in this case 35-foot buffer zones, which is also meant to accommodate sea level rise, infrastructure, flood control protections, but also public access, most typically with a trail on top of the bank. And then for the section on flood protection and sea level rise resilience, this is a map called the Map of Future Conditions that was developed with the assistance of One Shoreline, and Mr. Matterman will be discussing this more. There's a lot of tiny print here, so I will skip to the highlights in the next slide. It says that new construction on waterfront property should include shoreline infrastructure with a trail to protect against future water levels, and that the minimum first floor elevations of new buildings should be 3 feet above FEMA's base flood elevation at the building site. So currently that would be 13 feet. The way the map works, I'll just go back in the slide, this can change as we learn more about what's going on on the ground and in the water. So this is a map that's referenced in the zoning code, but can be updated as needed based on changes in the field. And sorry, I'm going to go back one more time. These little numbers that you see kind of along the shoreline, 16 feet, 17 feet, 18 feet, those are the elevations for the flood protection and sea level rise resiliency infrastructure. That could be a levee with a trail on top, but it could be pretty much anything where there's that elevation and it's a FEMA certified protection. It could be part of a berm, it could be part of an ecotone slope, but that is considered the elevation that needs to be protected for end of century protection. There's also the important urban design consideration, so we didn't lose that. We know that the BCDC guidelines talk a lot about access and also the quality of the experience for people visiting the shoreline. So there's also design principles, view corridors, the Bay Trail, public access, pedestrian amenities, design of the building, including the ground floor, building articulation, streetscape design for the areas not along the bayfront, and then parking locations and design and bird-friendly design. So there's really 3 parts to what building long-term resiliency looks like in Burlingame and other communities. And all of these complement each other and inform each other. First are the regulations and guidelines for long-term adaptation planning that we're discussing here in this presentation, but also our opportunities for major new developments along the water to contribute to adaptation solutions They're investing a lot of resources in new developments now, so it makes sense to also start building up the resiliency for sea level rise as part of that. And then tying into a regional project to analyze and guide these solutions. So as mentioned, a lot of the input that we received into the numbers within the zoning code have come from One Shoreline and their studies and aligns with their future regional project, which Mr. Matterman will be discussing in just a moment. So that's the overview. As mentioned, Len Matterman will be discussing the One Shoreline piece of the regional infrastructure. We can either, it's up to the chair whether to take questions now or to hear from both and take questions combined. Certainly.
Okay. Good to see you. Thank you for having us today to make this presentation. Sure. Okay, still good to see you. Thanks for having us. My name is Len Matterman, and I run a special district that was created in January of 2020 called the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District to work countywide on the water-related issues associated with climate change. Let's see, press the arrow here to advance. That's not. Thank you. Okay, so I'll go over a bit about the why of One Shoreline, what we're about, talk about our kind of program of which the Burlingame shoreline is a part. Several studies done by San Mateo County in 2018. There was a Stanford study in 2021, a Caltrans study in 2020. There was a grand jury report that brought together many studies, and there's one that's coming out now on our Pacific Coast side. All of these point to the fact that, as well as others, that San Mateo County is the most vulnerable county in the state to the first 3 feet of sea level rise in terms of population, including underrepresented population, homes, contaminated sites, and property value. These are an image I'm sure you've seen before of the bay shoreline of San Mateo County, and our county has 20 cities, not all of which touch the shoreline either on the Pacific side or the bay side. And so the way we think about how this directly relates to people in the county, whether they live and work on the shoreline or not, is if you drive along Highway 101, about 80% of it is in the sea level rise affected zone. Highway 1, whether you flush a toilet, drink water from Hetch Hetchy, or use electricity or natural gas, or you care about our beaches and our marshes, this issue is for you. It's a transformative issue for this county, and to become resilient, our philosophy is we need to be all in, and we need to be all in together. So state legislation created One Shoreline. It was the first independent government agency of its kind, really, on the West Coast. We take a holistic view to threats. This winter is an example. of what we think of as a new normal, because that's what we've been hearing for many years from scientists. 2 atmospheric rivers, a couple other sprinkles, otherwise drought. So we care not just about the shoreline, but also about these atmospheric rivers, and think of the threats in terms of not just maybe a historic 100-year storm or 100-year tide, but what does the confluence of things look like under climate scenarios. Holistic view and objectives. We are about reducing threats, but we're also about turning assets, what had previously been considered liabilities on our shoreline and our waterways, into assets for the communities so that they can appreciate that. Kevin showed some good images of, some of our creeks are not right now considered community amenities, and we're about changing that, as well as the shoreline in many areas, including along the shoreline of Burlingame, and a holistic view of geography. One Shoreline's countywide bay program covers our 53 miles of the bay shoreline, and we believe that no one jurisdiction can address the issue even for themselves and their jurisdiction, and they need to be aligned and connected with their neighbors. And so that's why One Shoreline was brought about. Here's an image that shows some of our current projects. We're the lead agency on the projects in blue, and that includes the Bayfront Canal and Atherton Channel project in the bottom right, which is a project that we completed construction on. We were actually handed that. Designs were complete, but it didn't have permits or money or land rights in 2020, and fortunately we've pushed that through. It addresses a frequent flooding issue on the Bayfront for 5 mobile home parks. So we're glad that they're finally getting some relief after decades of frequent flooding. You see their Burlingame and Millbrae project connected to San Francisco International Airport. I'll talk about that. And so what you can see here are the projects by others. Foster City is building a wall, as you know. San Francisco Airport is in planning. And what we're about is creating a program to knit these together again in an aligned and connected way. We believe resilience projects should be large enough to address a connected problem, but small enough to be manageable by a lead agency. Capital projects can't be run by committee. There needs to be an agency under CEQA and an agency leading the design process. And fortunately, all 20 cities have provided funding for us during our startup phase, as well as San Mateo County, and they're all invested in One Shoreline success. And so one of the elements of us taking on projects is that we're the lead agency. We focus on long-term value. Long-term to us is not about 2030 or 2050 or 2100, because those numbers are changing all the time. They're always getting worse. I haven't heard them yet getting better. But we're about the number. What are we building to in terms of a level of protection? Multi-jurisdictional, I just mentioned, and multi-benefit, not just flood protection, sea level rise protection, but looking at the recreational and habitat values, both in terms of how can so-called green infrastructure help protect our communities, but also how can we protect natural areas as part of this kind of knitted together shoreline. One Shoreline's priority is unlocking the keys for funding and financing. When we talk about financing, and this gets to the point about developments along the Burlingame shoreline that Kevin talked about, is when you think about it, our developers and our cities and the investors behind developers and cities, there's a lot to gain by resilience. There's reduced uncertainty, there's reduced insurance premiums and requirements, increased land values, increased project lifespans, increased ratings for bonds and for environment and social governance. Those things need to be translated into the benefits that our public agencies and our private developers receive. So there are all these benefits to resilience. We need to translate that into the capital costs of building the resilience. So we're doing that. Here's an image that shows San Francisco International Airport surrounded by Burlingame and Millbrae to the south or southeast, and then San Bruno more to the west and South San Francisco to the north. This is a picture from this year's King Tide, upstream along Colma Creek near the Costco in South San Francisco. Here are some images from farther upstream, over a mile upstream from the bay, in San Bruno during a storm event at the top. This was in October 2021 and in January 2022 during just the King Tide, pretty far upstream. And then Also in late 2021, this is an area of Millbrae going up the creek from Highline Canal, which is just south of San Francisco International Airport. And then you can kind of see it in the room. But anyway, in September of 2021, this was not a king tide, but it was a high tide. And you can tell the water level relative to the current wall. So there's an issue here. Obviously, as you know, our creeks intersect with our bay, and the higher the water level in the bay, the harder it is for the creeks to flow during these storm events. And so we care about both considerably. So our look at this area, SFO has its own project that's shown in yellow. Essentially, SFO has two fundamental options if it's going to achieve the sea level rise objectives for its project. One is to build along its entire Highway 101 interior, let's call it, and the other is to connect to our neighbors and their neighbors, and that includes Burlingame and Millbrae to the south, and South San Francisco at San Bruno Creek heading north on the north side of the airport. So we work closely with the airport. Big picture is that we and the cities and the airport, we meaning One Shoreline, establish common objectives for the projects, share technical information, environmental mitigations, costs, and lands. And the last one is particularly important. SFO has land rights that the cities and One Shoreline needs to achieve our objectives, and vice versa. The cities have land rights that SFO needs to achieve its objectives. Our objectives are the FEMA 100-year plus 6 feet of sea level rise, which is equal to about 10 feet above today's high tide. So diving into this project a little more, this is something that Kevin showed in his presentation. It's currently, just having been launched, the largest sea level rise project in the state. Our objectives are to keep the areas associated with those red lines, of which there are many miles, from overtopping for decades into the future, and enhance the natural areas and trails, some of which really could use enhancement along the shoreline. In March, so meaning just a short time ago, we signed an agreement with the state to fund a portion of the design and CEQA and permitting, potentially NEPA. And we've signed a consultant contract, and our consultant team is now working on data collection, 30% design, and a draft EIR. We expect that to be finished in 2024. Just last weekend, this is an image from the front page of our countywide daily journal this past weekend, and we kicked off the project with the head of the airport, the mayors of the two cities, the chair of my board, who's Dave Pine, who is on the line and does want to make a few comments at the end of this. He's also a commissioner of BCDC, of course, and Kevin Mullen, who's the Assembly Speaker Pro Tem. So there are major developments in the city of Burlingame. These purple areas or pink areas show the locations of many of the developments, and all of these touch the shoreline, whether it's on the bay or on the bayfront channel behind the bay. And so we're working with these developers and looking at how their developments can be contributing to the solutions for this transformative issue that Burlingame faces. And thank you very much. Take your questions.
Well, thank you, Len, and thank you both to Kevin as well. And should we hear from Supervisor Pine now? Or?
Sure, I just have a few words to add. We really very much appreciate the opportunity to brief the Design Review Board on this work. We think it's really groundbreaking, and in particular, we'll be very interested in your perspectives on the zoning ordinance and how that interacts with BCDC's sea level rise planning. So I think there's a lot to talk about here, and hopefully Burlingame and San Mateo can serve as an example for other parts of the bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Pine. And I just want to say straight off the bat, before we go to some questions or comments, exciting it is to see Burlingame, ahead of the curve here around the bay, really setting the example from, for a more, I'm going to say, well, this is a county-wide, but, setting the stage for a regional-wide approach to adaptation and sea level rise. So it's really exciting to hear about the work you've been doing. And I would say from the BCDC Design Review Board perspective, when we review projects, we're reviewing a single site. And in fact, the diagram you had up there with the current development projects, we're reviewing them individually. And it's always a question for us as the Design Review Board, how does this connect to the adjacent area? We may reduce vulnerability here on this site, but then what's the big picture? So it's really important to see work like this being done, and I think it's something that can be held up as the way forward for so many other parts of the Bay. So thank you for that. Are there any specific comments or questions from the board? Bob, please, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and I echo your comments about how excited we are to see a regional plan, and it's nice to see the county take a leadership role on this, and makes our job a little easier, actually, to have those local guidelines for sea level rise. It seems to me that the plan really emphasizes the existing land uses, and yet it also seems to mention some setbacks from the shore and from the tidal creeks. And I think that may be a real opportunity for all of us, because while we're pretty good at looking at the surface water inundation and, adding sea level rise to the 100-year flood level, some of our creek flood risks are not as well defined as you alluded to. And as we go into the future, as the bay rises, it's going to be harder to get some of the runoff out of those creeks into the bay. And then the other component that I think is probably worth considering, and I think you are, is the ecology and how we maintain our ecology too. And both of those require space, I think. I mean, there may be other ways of handling it, space, or there's some more traditional ways, but I guess that's something I've mentioned in these meetings, is to think about setting back some of our pathways outside or at the back edge of the 100-foot band, and providing some space for marshes and beaches and the like to transgress with sea level rise and buffer space. And then in the creeks, providing some additional storage, and how we handle the conveyance. I'm not exactly sure. I think that's site specific. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to make those comments as an engineer. And as a resident of San Mateo County, I'm really glad to see the county moving on this. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Comments from anyone else? Yeah.
Thanks very much for two very informative presentations. Director Gardner, I have a question for you. The establishment of the 100-foot shoreline band in your ordinance, are you treating that as a setback for new development, or is it sort of similar to the BCDC's approach where it's sort of an overlay?
Thank you. It is, it's a bit of both. It is being treated as a setback, but it's not a hard and fast rule. So if there is a building encroachment within the 100 feet, it specifies that it needs to be not at the expense of future adaptation infrastructure. So, we don't want something built with only 20 feet left or something, but the occasional, whether it's for urban design or architectural, public access, those kinds of encroachments could be allowed.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that just presents another dilemma that we experience a lot, where we are trying to measure maximizing public access to the shoreline, but the 100-foot shoreline band is coming into conflict with local jurisdiction zoning setbacks. So it's often very difficult, or we see a lot of private development that's proposed within that shoreline band. So I think this provides an opportunity to sort of clarify and bring together those two standards between the BCDC and a local jurisdiction. Thank you.
And just to build on that point, Vice Chair Gary is always making this point, but and land uses can adjust over time, and we're particularly concerned about the projects that we're seeing where residential development is encroaching in the 100-foot band, and how vulnerable that is, especially if the residential developments are condominiums or where people will have to, they will be left to their own devices ultimately on how to provide greater resiliency. So clearly the work you're doing is aimed to protect everyone, but we really feel that residential development needs special attention for any new proposed residential development along the Bay Edge. I'd just be interested in a reaction to that comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair McCann. That's a very important consideration. When the city did its general plan update, that was one of the big questions. It's a perennial question with the Bayfront is whether to allow residential within what's traditionally been a commercial district on the, whether north or east, depending on how you look at it, side of Highway 101. The decision was made to not allow residential, although there may be some planning principles that would encourage mixes of uses, including residential, for the purposes of sea level rise. The city thought it was best to not introduce residential to this area. It's really, as you mentioned, the land use operates differently, and then you're really putting households in a place where maybe they're not as prepared as a commercial project might be should flooding or sea level rise occur. Back to the planning side, we also said let's concentrate residential where the existing transportation and services are. So there were some kind of solid planning principles as well, but until we figured out what the city was going to do with sea level rise, we were really reluctant to introduce some new residential uses into that area.
Look, I just had one question on the One Shoreline program. Is this a permanently funded program going forward? What's the status of the program?
Thank you for the question. So we, when One Shoreline was created, all 20 cities committed to the first 3 years of startup operational funds, and that was matched by San Mateo County. We've additionally received some funding from San Mateo County and the state, and the event that happened on Friday with Mr. Mullen was part of that funding strategy for both the project that we're talking about, but also for One Shoreline operations. So we have funding for several more years. The county is exploring, San Mateo County is exploring right now a countywide parcel tax for climate resilience to address both the water and wildfire-related concerns associated with climate change. And they're exploring putting that on the ballot in November. No decisions have been made. If that were to be put on the ballot and were to be passed by the voters of the county, then that would be a potential funding source in perpetuity for One Shoreline and for our project activities, as well as folks worried about drought and wildfire and those other climate issues that our county faces.
Thank you. Well, that's terrific to hear that there are mechanisms being explored, because I think that's going to be critical to see. This is a long-term endeavour, so it's really critical to have that type of commitment. Yeah, thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. Thank you so much for that presentation. It's very promising to see that kind of holistic thinking. And, you know, there were 4 types of strategies that were identified for treating the shoreline. You know, most often we see levees, and we're seeing more and more walls. And, you know, we always talk about how, you know, that levee solution is only as good as what your neighboring property is doing, so having those connected is great. I still see there are some gaps, you know, in the levee, and then, of course, at some point you get to the edge of your county, and then where does that water go? And so, you know, I don't expect you to solve that problem, but those are the things that kind of come to mind. And what Bob was saying about how these creeks drain to the bay, you know, that's an issue, but I think there's also just normal runoff, you know, sheet runoff, surface runoff. When you build a levee or a wall, how does the water pass through? And if the water is not allowed to, anyway, it continues to back up. And then building the levees, I mean, we don't see as much soft shoreline as we would love to see. So in a way, if that all became a continuous wall, I think you're losing some absorptive capacity that exists on the shoreline now. So not easy questions, but those are just some things to think about. And then, of course, I guess there's the groundwater question. So, water's coming up from underneath as well, behind the wall. So, thank you.
I think we'll wrap up this item. I just want to say again, thank you to our presenters. Really appreciate you coming here and doing this in person as well. It makes a big difference. So I think with that, we will continue on to the next agenda item, and it's in Burlingame. So we can take everything that we've just learned and the really positive direction that Burlingame's going in and think about this in a site-specific sense. So we're going to be reviewing the LPC West development, the Office and R&D campus at 777 Airport Boulevard in Burlingame. So we'll begin our review on agenda item 5, which is the first review of 777 Airport Boulevard in Burlingame. And to remind you of the project order, we start with a staff introduction. We'll have a project proponent presentation, board clarifying questions, public comment, and then board discussion and summary. So, there is a brief project proponent response that can happen at the end of the item as well. So with that, BCDC staff Shruti Sinha is going to introduce the project. For those online, not sitting in this room, we're going through some technical, just solving some technical questions here. So if you can bear with us, it'll just take a minute.
Thank you for everyone's patience. All right, we are on to 777 Airport Boulevard. 777 Airport Boulevard is one in a series of projects in Burlingame. So I'll start by giving a brief overview of the area with respect to our work at BCDC. Before we discuss the project, we would like to begin by acknowledging that the majority of the land in this area was once water and historic tidal flats located near Salson, the unceded ancestral home of the Ramaytush Ohlone. We offer gratitude to the indigenous peoples who are the original stewards of the bountiful natural resources of the Bay Area. This slide shows the major land and water features in the vicinity. Because there are a number of projects in the Burlingame area subject to DRB review, we are presenting this introduction in a slightly different format, and we want to show you the location of these projects in their relative contexts. Burlingame Point, which is where Meta's Oculus campus is located, was permitted by BCDC in 2017, and the public access was opened in late 2020. Last month, the board reviewed 410 Airport and 567 Airport. Tonight, the board will review 777 Airport, and next month in June, the board will review 1300 Bayshore Highway. Here are some regional context for parks and public access areas shown in blue with the existing Bay Trail alignment in red. Note that the Bay Trail passes underneath the Anza Boulevard adjacent to the 777 Airport Boulevard site. The project is currently occupied by Red Roof Inn, a 214-room hotel for which the original BCDC permit was issued. The required public access for the site includes 21,700 square feet of landscape public access areas, including 11 public shoreline access parking spaces. BCDC staff visited the site last Friday on May 6th. This slide contains a few photos taken from that visit. Photo 1 shows the off-site portion of the proposed Bay Trail improvements. Photo 2 shows the hotel in the center with the shoreline access parking spaces to the left and a bench and the Bay Trail to the right. Photo 3 is another shot of the Bay Trail on site. And photo 4 is a shot of the Bay Trail running under the Anza Boulevard, which at this location is the ramp connecting to Highway 101. In looking again at some of the regional setting of the project location, BCDC's vulnerability mapping tool shows the project area as having low social vulnerability based upon the 2020 census data. However, there are some areas to the southeast of the project site that have high social vulnerability. The demographics represented by this statistics are children under 5, people over 65 living alone, people with no high school degree, people with limited English proficiency, people who are not U.S. citizens, and people with very low income. Regarding potential sea level rise and using current site elevations, this map shows what 24 inches of sea level rise would look like if the site remained unchanged. This project used 2 risk aversion planning scenarios from the 2018 OPC sea level rise guidance for their park design. They used the low risk aversion scenario for the park improvements and the medium to high risk aversion scenario for the education center and Bay Trail. Both scenarios are listed in the table on the left with their sea level rise projection. Sea level rise for the low risk aversion scenario is equivalent to a king tide in 2050, which shows no flooding on the site. For the medium to high risk aversion scenario, 24 inches of sea level rise is equivalent to the mean higher high water level, which would also not cause any flooding on the site. Although not shown on this figure, I will note that under the medium to high risk scenario, a 10-year flood event could produce some flooding on the site in the lower lying portions. This map shows what 66 inches of sea level rise would look like at the site if unchanged. San Francisco Estuary Institute Adaptation Atlas notes suitability for beaches and eelgrass on the bayside with tidal marshes and ecotone levees on the lagoons. The small bits of orange color indicate migration space for adaptation. This slide is to briefly note the Bay Plan policies and guidelines that apply to these projects. The policy section has been omitted from the staff report for 777 Peninsula Airport Boulevard, but BCDC policies on public access, appearance, design, scenic views, recreation, climate change, and environmental justice should always be kept in mind when reviewing the projects. Does the board have any clarifying questions at this point?
Any clarifying questions? Yes, Paul?
So in light of the presentation that we've got from One Shoreline and City of Burlingame, does it affect BCDC's jurisdiction, or is the Burlingame community plan consistent with BCDC's regulations or policies on sea level rise? You don't have to answer that, but I just thought I would ask the question. And my second question was, what are we reviewing? What's in the jurisdiction of the board tonight? It's just the access way, right? Okay, thanks. But yeah, I think that's a good question to ask about why we like the city and regional guidance. How does that compare to BCDC's policies and practice?
Hi, maybe I'll just weigh in on that. Ethan Levine, the Shoreline Development Program Manager. It's really great to see everyone in person for such a long time, seeing you on Zoom. I just want to say, just in a nutshell, BCDC's policies on climate change and resilience say that projects the Commission's approving need to be resilient to projected flooding through 2050. And that there has to be policies in place that would, or there has to be conditions in place that will allow the project to adapt for the life of that project after 2050 through the end of the century. So it's not exactly the same as the proposal, or sorry, the ordinance we heard about just earlier, and the overall plan for the county, but it's not at odds with it. There's some overlap there.
Thank you. That's what I thought, but I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it would be fair to say, Nathan, that for BCDC and us both, we should be taking both things, both the new ordinance and BCDC guidelines into account. I think we've got two excellent ways to look at these projects going forward. So, thank you. Okay, Sweetie, I think you can keep going.
Okay, well, now Mark Huffman and Jacob Peterson will present the project for 777 Airport Boulevard.
Mark Huffman, Lincoln Property Company, and I cannot tell you how pleased I am to actually be here physically in person. I can't remember the last time we've done this, so this is great. It's also a real treat for me because I'm meeting many of my project team members in person for the very first time. So, you know, just getting out of the virtual world, it's awesome. Here with my colleague Brandon Wong with Lincoln. JP Peterson Studio is going to walk you through the project, and also Gensler, Uli Kanata, and Mine Kwan are here to answer any questions that you have. As your staff has described, I mean, a lot of great things going on in Burlingame and the Anza Peninsula in particular, and we're really excited to be a part of that. And we're really excited about all of the improvements and benefits that we think we're bringing to the shoreline zone. So without further ado, thank you, Mark.
So I'm going to do as brief a presentation as I can. It'll be longer than many of us want, but I'll get through it as quickly as I can. Again, Jacob Peterson with Peterson Studio. The first slide talks about the location of the site on the peninsula, southeast of the international airport, located on the Burlingame shoreline on the bayfront, between the Burlingame Lagoon to the south, the Anza Boulevard to the west, the hotel to the east, Airport Boulevard to the north, a series of mid-rise office and hotel buildings across Airport Boulevard towards the bay to the north, and then engaging a whole network of bay trails that surround the site, engages, one of the bay trails actually goes underneath Anza Boulevard, engages the site on the south end, but there are a series of other bay trails around Anza Lagoon and along the shoreline. There are active bike lanes along both sides of Airport Boulevard in both directions, and 2 shuttle stops that are shown here on the slide. I won't go through the existing site conditions since that was already covered by Shruti. Some of the existing site photographs I think we've already talked about also, but slides 1 through 3 really describe the shoreline condition adjacent to our south property line with a 9 to 11 foot sort of a little bit diminished bay trail, sort of furnishings that are falling apart a little bit, some overgrown planting. The shoreline condition is a rubble reinforced shoreline revetment. Images 2 and 3 show the lagoon condition during low tide, which I think a lot of people are actually surprised is a mudflat during low tide. It's full of water during high tide, but it entirely transforms, which is really cool and interesting, into a really vast mudflat during low tide. Image 4 shows the low gradient, unreinforced shoreline condition within the Anza Boulevard right-of-way. And image 5, as Shruti mentioned, is the sort of low head clearance underpass where the Bay Trail passes below Anza Boulevard Bridge. And this is about 8 feet of head clearance. This is an area of the Bay Trail that will not be able to be raised because of the limited head height. So this is a sort of a fixed conform line for all of our improvements, which is kind of interesting. So this is the overall site plan, building kind of in the center in white. Generally, the project has a more urban landscape along the Airport Boulevard frontage, an urban plaza condition, engaging the activity of the peninsula, of the city, more paved, more active. The other side of the project, what we're going to call the west side of the project, adjacent to the lagoon, really celebrates and encourages interaction with the natural resource of the lagoon and extensive native coastal planting restoration, encompassing a series of landscape gathering and amenity spaces, including a picnic plaza, lagoon overlook, shoreline plaza, and a significant sloped lawn. It is important to convey that there's a significant grade change from the upper right-hand side of the site at Anza Boulevard and the Anza Bridge, that the grade sort of comes up in elevation as we approach the bridge from elevation about 11.5 up to elevation 22.5 at the east side of the bridge. So, think of that as an 11-foot grade change with an embankment. We are engaging and activating that embankment with a sloped lawn, which you see as the sort of green half circle.
So we're sort of activating and engaging that sloped landscape area. There are a series of important statistics at the lower left-hand side of the slide, talking about the overall site area, 3.087 acres, the building square footage, the building height, the building parking spaces, things of that nature. The site and shoreline access diagram shows the Bay Trail in a bold green line. This is the major pedestrian and bike access conduit along the lagoon frontage. It is an important corridor. We're widening that Bay Trail to a 14-foot width, again from an existing 9 to 11-foot width. Where it is dashed is the location that it passes underneath the Anza Bridge, the overpass condition. There are a series of pedestrian routes, pedestrian paths that surround the site, the Anza and Airport Boulevard sidewalks, shown in dashed red, and then the major pedestrian circulation connection to the shoreline along the south edge of the building, a secondary site access connecting the Bay Trail to up the Anza embankment to the Anza streetscape, shown in the upper left. There are 11 proposed public shore parking stalls on the planned west side of the building, with public shore parking signage, as well as public shore parking signage at the access drive entrance, and 4 Bay Trail signs at each kind of access point to the Bay Trail around the perimeter of the site. The diagram also shows the buffered bike lanes along Airport Boulevard, bike parking stalls along the Airport Boulevard Plaza, the north end of that plaza, and then along the west side of the Shoreline Plaza. So we really have bike access and parking along both sides of the site, directly adjacent to the bike corridors. The vehicular circulation diagram shows the vehicular circulation consolidated along the south and west side of the site. There is a roundabout at the drop-off and lobby access in the center south of the diagram. The daily vehicular access sort of terminates at the north end of the public shore parking stalls, and then the dashed orange arrow above that connecting to Anza is an EVA-only access that will be a controlled access on a daily basis. So that will not be a daily driving route, but more of a controlled EVA route. Service and loading will be accommodated along the north side of the building, along Anza Boulevard. There are some median modifications and striping modifications that are required to make that work, but we have begun to coordinate that with Public Works in the city, and we're optimistic that that solution will be approved and moving forward. The Airport Boulevard Plaza creates a dramatic point of arrival and destination for the urban frontage of the building. The informal landscape islands, garden islands, frame a series of circulation corridors that connect Airport Boulevard to the public amenities or the private amenities within the building, and then the public amenities along the shoreline. Ample seating, pedestrian scale lighting, enhanced pedestrian paving, and bike racks create an inviting, sort of active streetscape environment along this frontage. Along the shoreline, the landscape is really designed to celebrate the interaction with the natural resource of the bay. All of the landscape spaces, the occupied spaces, are really framed by restoration short coastal plantings. You see the 14-foot Bay Trail through the center of the drawing, the overlook seating platforms and view scope off to the left, the Shoreline Plaza in the midground right, programmed with diverse tables and chairs, seating platforms. In the background, you see the sloped lawn that provides an informal sort of seating amphitheater overlooking the activities of the lagoon, the activity of the Bay Trail and the shoreline. Concrete seating terraces activate that lawn seating slope. The other end of the Bay Trail is activated by a picnic niche, a picnic node that extends activity out towards the edge of the lagoon, again framed in planting on both sides. There will be a small interpretive lagoon program node attached to the picnic plaza.
You can see on the left-hand side of the drawing the new accessible connection between the Bay Trail and the higher elevation of the Anza streetscape, so up to the left. In the midground, you see the sloped lawn and the building in the background. This drawing shows the 4 elevations of the building, which is designed really as simplified as 3 layers. Gensler, forgive me for this description, but at the base, we have the storefront and sort of functional access points along the amenity and lobby spaces. The center of the building is the parking podium, and the top of the building is essentially the levels of office lab space, with the north and south elevations sort of activated by the central balcony spaces. This diagram shows the full extent of the 100-foot shoreline band on site. The extent along our south property line measures 330 feet. So that equals about 0.72 acres of on-site public shoreline access area. We do have some very small private uses within that space. We have about 19 feet of one corner of the building that extends into that, and then a small amount of parking that is for the building that extends into that. So we're actually subtracting that 1,500 feet from the overall proposed on-site public access area to yield about 0.6 acres. In addition to the 0.68 acres, we are proposing to improve about 0.55 acres of off-site public access area. So the total public access area on-site plus off-site will be about 1.25 acres. And we really feel like this space will allow us to create what looks and feels very much like a small public waterfront park that's actively engaged with the lagoon, with the improved 14-foot Bay Trail, where a series of shoreline seating and gathering spaces like the picnic node, the shoreline overlook, are activated by the adjacent shoreline plaza and the sloped lawn and seating terraces that overlook the activity of the plaza out to the lagoon beyond. You can see that the entirety of the sloped lawn area and the shoreline plaza are encompassed and sheltered by a thickened, multi-layered planting buffer that provides a wind-sheltered environment from the prevailing wind, which we think will encourage active year-round recreation, community activities, events, outdoor work, collaboration, all those types of things. The white dashed outlined areas that are labeled BMP, those are stormwater treatment gardens. Technically, they're called flow-through planters. So those will treat stormwater before discharge into the system. The public shoreline band is shown on this drawing is in purple. And the public access parking stalls are just west of the building in all of these drawings. Shoreline resiliency and flood protection will really be provided in 2 stages. The initial construction, the first stage of the project, will elevate the entire shoreline up to an elevation of 13-foot minimum. The revetment will be at 14 to 14.9 feet elevation. So we will have a revetment that provides significantly more protection than the adjacent Bay Trail. We're building the revetment slightly higher. What this 13-foot minimum elevation will achieve is flood level protection, we think, through mid-century, but I think that's consistent with all the discussions we had earlier. I see a head shaking here, but that's good to talk about. So there are several pieces of information that are probably important just to mention. There are a series of contours on here shown in orange that convey the connections to the existing topography along Anza Boulevard. There are a series of spot grades that also convey the proposed elevations all across the shoreline. And there are a series of slope grades, percentage slopes shown on the drawing. So all that information really combines to convey our proposal for the initial phase of construction. So it's important also to mention that the building finish floor, as Kevin talked about, that is being set at a 13-foot elevation, so that is the city's requirement. The shoreline in the initial construction is being built so that it is flush essentially with the building. So you walk out of the building, you walk right out to the shoreline. From the building, you can, even the ground floor, you can look out and you can see the shoreline, you can see the water. The shoreline is not built up as a barrier between the building, the Airport Boulevard sidewalk, and the lagoon. So the elevation that we're proposing really provides very good site access and visual access to the shoreline as a resource. So per Kevin's presentation, we are also demonstrating a long-term adaptation at some point in the future after mid-century up to an elevation of 16 feet and showing how the multiple things that will need to be adjusted along the shoreline to achieve that higher 16-foot minimum elevation. So this drawing shows all of the areas in colored tone and which of those areas will have to be modified and how they will need to be modified. So I'll just go through a couple of them. The blue toned area along the shoreline is the revetment. The revetment will be elevated up to 16.5 feet. It will be extended horizontally as we raise the elevation of it. It gets horizontally wider. The widening of the revetment will displace some of the shoreline seating and gathering spaces at the picnic plaza and at the overlook. So those will be transitioned over to the shoreline plaza. The south edge of the Bay Trail will be shifted horizontally landward about 6 or 8 feet. And then the planting within the green toned areas will be elevated. The shoreline plaza is elevated. There are 2 grade changes that would need to be constructed where the number 2 are shown on the drawing. One of those areas will become a 2.5-foot stair. The other will become a 2.5-foot ramp. And those 2.5-foot grade changes will mitigate the grade differential between the access drive and the public shore parking that will remain at their initial construction elevations and the adapted shoreline, which will be brought up to a minimum 16-foot elevation. So that 16-foot elevation, we believe, conforms to the city's map of future conditions target of the end of century at 16-foot elevation. So we believe we're conforming with that. So the next 2 drawings show the sections of the shoreline at initial construction at the 13-foot minimum elevation. And again, the actual elevation that we're building the revetment at is 14.45 feet minimum at the top of the revetment along the south shoreline. So that's our actual flood control line. You can see how those lines correspond to the sort of datum of the mean high water line, the base flood elevation, and the 2050 sea level rise plus base flood elevation on the right-hand side of the drawing. What these sections of the initial construction demonstrate is that we do have adequate shoreline protection through mid-century to provide flood protection and shoreline resiliency. As we look at the adaptation in the future up to a 16-foot minimum elevation, the red-toned areas on this overlay show how the landscape will be adapted to accommodate that higher 16-foot minimum elevation to provide resiliency and flood protection through end of century. So the end of century 2100 BFE plus sea level rise is shown as the dashed line on the right. We can talk about those numbers if there's an interest in that. But we think these sections and the plan diagrams demonstrate our strategy of creating a 2-stage mid-century and end-of-century solution for resiliency and future adaptation, while retaining the essential amenities and character and qualities of the initial construction, which we think is very, very important. So this diagram shows the proposed pedestrian pavings, enhanced concrete unit pavers at the Airport Boulevard Plaza, at the Shoreline Plaza to the west, enhanced concrete unit pavers connecting those 2 plazas across the lobby plaza. The lobby plaza itself will be enhanced paving spilling out from the lobby and across the roundabout to the south, that's shown in blue. The Bay Trail will be asphalt. That's consistent with the Bay Trail that we installed at Burlingame Point. That's been working extremely well. It's also the same width as we're doing it as we installed at Burlingame Point. So we're happy with that as well. The connection up to the Anza Boulevard Sidewalk will also be asphalt. The Anza Boulevard sidewalk itself will be regular cast-in-place concrete. This drawing shows the series of gardens that will be kind of enhancing the different areas of the site. Of pertinence to this discussion is the items 1 and 2, which show the sort of native-based coastal restoration plantings that will dominate the shoreline and the Anza embankment. Item number 5 shows the streetscape proposal and proposed street tree of the London Plain Columbia cultivar, which is the same cultivar that we used at Burlingame Point. We've reviewed that selection with the city, and that seems to be what we're going to go with. This slide shows the proposed tree removal and replacement plan. One thing that a lot of these coastal sites are going to be grappling with that hasn't really been dealt with before is a whole pancake of fill across the entire site, and how does that impact existing trees on site? And really how that impacts trees is the trees go away and you replant, 100 new trees. So essentially, we are filling the entire site. We are taking out the trees that are on the lower portions of the site. We are replacing them with 104 new trees that we feel will greatly enhance the character and diversity of Burlingame's urban forest. The existing trees are predominantly eucalyptus and acacia, which have maintenance and kind of, I think, safety concerns. We have reviewed this proposal with the city's arborist just to make sure that they understood and supported the plan, and they really did. They felt that this was the best way to go and really the only direction forward with a mandate to raise the site for sea level rise protection. The entire landscape will be illuminated to create a safe, comfortable, and welcoming nighttime environment with pedestrian light poles along the entirety of the Bay Trail, and then kind of spilling into the Shoreline Plaza, into the sloped lawn amphitheater space. That's shown in orange. The blue lights are more functional, higher level illumination of the access drive and surface parking areas along the south and west sides of the building. There will also be functional street lights that we coordinated with the city to meet their photometric requirements, shown in dark orange, and a series of kind of pedestrian-oriented accent lighting along the west and south face of the building, integrated within the garden islands and within the soffit portico area as a bridge between the interior amenity spaces and the exterior plaza and circulation spaces. The center of the turnaround, the roundabout at the lobby plaza, will have a sculpture. That sculpture will be illuminated to create a dramatic sort of point of arrival in the midway between Airport Boulevard and the shoreline. So this final slide shows the diversity of furnishings and amenities along the shoreline. There will be a combination of picnic tables, backed and backless benches, seating platforms, concrete seating terraces integrated into the lawn slope, drinking fountain that will be accessible with a dog drinking bowl. All of these together, we think will contribute to a very active, dynamic shoreline environment that really feels a lot more like a small public waterfront park than it does a trail with a couple benches. And I think that was our primary goal, is to create an active destination, a vibrant community destination along the Bay Trail as a gathering space, as a node, similar to what Burlingame Point achieved. So that's the conclusion of our presentation, and I think we would be delighted to answer any questions or have conversations about any of the specific elements.
Well, thank you very much, Jacob. That was excellent presentation. I'd like to just ask the board members now if you've got clarifying questions on the presentation. Go ahead, Andrew.
I just had a question about the emergency vehicle access, and is it absolutely impossible for that to be the drive access for the public parking? I guess my concern is relating that it's kind of invisible.
It's a very good question, and the question was, we felt exactly the same, and we had multiple conversations with the city in multiple venues and through a long dialogue with, particularly with Public Works. I think it was determined that was not feasible for a number of reasons. primarily because that's the off-ramp from the freeway. And we literally can't make the traffic movements work in a safe manner.
Right, sightlines from it. Okay.
Even if it was, we even tried the only in or the only out solution. Neither of those would work either.
All right, thank you.
So the emergency vehicle access, it was sort of that wasn't our first choice. That was really a fallback compromise solution.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Tom?
From Airport Boulevard, the main public access goes by the lobby entry and then by the garage to get to the park back there.
That's correct.
Other clarifying questions? Stefan?
I would like to make sure that I understand the sea level rise impacts on the lagoon versus the bay, and in the future, is the lagoon, will it be subject to the same level of sea level rise as the bay?
The sea level rise is similar, but there's no wave run up, so the actual recommended heights are a little bit different. So the map of future conditions is the city's policy on the height that we will need at the end of century. It's actually 16 feet within the lagoon. Outside the lagoon, it's more like 18 feet, and that's because of the wave action on the exposed shoreline portions of the bay. And, in the lagoon, we have limited fetch across the water to generate waves of a certain size, so our wave run-up is a lot smaller. So the actual height of the revetment of the shoreline infrastructure is lower.
Okay, and then just have a related question about the underpass and the sort of long-term adaptability strategy of that that section. And I don't know if that is a question for the applicant or the city. Yeah, is the idea to sort of maintain that as long as possible?
I can chime in, Kevin Gardner, Community Development Director. The answer is we don't quite know. It is something we need to study, but it's exactly that. You've got the overpass coming down, and you've got the sandwich and want to rise, but then you've already got the overpass. So that is something we'll need to look at as part of the regional project.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have
Garrett?
a question. Yeah, can we look at a site plan for a second? I just had a question about the shoreline band where, it's shown within the property line, but then outside the property line, there's that area between the property line and the boulevard, which I understand you're improving that whole area as part of the project, even though it's off-site. And so I was just curious where the shoreline band is once it leaves your property.
Yeah,
Which I think I can guess, but I just want to make sure.
But this is probably is that a good slide?
Yeah, perfect.
So the question is the on-site shoreline band and how we're improving that relative to the off-site areas?
Yeah, how does the shoreline band continue beyond the property line?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so the shoreline band, and please correct me if this is incorrect, I believe it's generated not relative to property lines at all. It's generated from the mean high water line, and it's a 100-foot offset from the mean high water line. So it actually would curve around and intersect, ultimately with Anza Boulevard.
Okay, so it just tracks the shoreline.
Yeah, and you can actually see the curve at the north end of it, Gary, as it's starting to wrap around.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
And, technically, that all of the improvements, beyond our property line, they're discretionary. They're something that we're giving to the community as we think is a benefit to the community.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was wondering. That's a big piece of property.
It's 0.55 acres that we're improving, and that's a significant expense, and it includes a lot of amenities and regrading and replanting and all the irrigation and perhaps quite a bit of maintenance in the future.
Got it. Thank you.
If we could go to the cross sections, I have a question. so if you, maybe even the next slide,
Yeah.
just if we could just toggle between, this one. So the top cross section, on the left-hand side there adjacent to the road, is that a berm that you're building up, or is that
It is.
existing
So-
ground is much lower there,
so you
right?
can see there's a dashed line below the slope, and that dashed line, if you could see it larger, it says existing grade.
Right.
And so what we're doing is we're taking a sloped revetment, a sloped embankment that is the Anza embankment that has the 11 feet of grade change from Airport Boulevard up to the bridge, and we're actually just making it a little taller. So the top of that landform is at 25. The west edge of the Anza Bridge at sidewalk is at 22.5. So we're building, the peak of that landform is 2.5 feet higher than the sidewalk at our end of the bridge.
Yeah.
And that's because Anza comes down and our landform kind of comes up. So it's almost no landform at the bridge. Slope down towards Airport Boulevard as the off-ramp goes down, transitions down from the bridge position, it becomes exposed as front of the landform and the positive landform on the Anza Boulevard side. Yeah, so there's, in the initial construction, the landform is a maximum height on the plaza side of 11 feet. In the ultimate condition, it's about 8.5 feet, which, not too high.
Yeah.
In the, in the adaptation.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Stefan.
You mentioned the prevailing winds coming from the northwest in this location. Has any study been done to see if this building is tall enough that it would actually create a downdraft?
If the building is tall enough to create a downdraft, I don't think we have, I'll leave that to Uli. Have we done a wind study, Uli? Yeah. So the shoreline is on the building won't impact the winds on any of the shoreline landscapes that we're improving because they're sort of downwind.
Yeah.
So the building won't influence the winds on our shoreline plaza and slope lawn, I don't think.
Yeah, I was curious about the portion of the Bay Trail that's leading up to the building to the south and east.
Yeah,
was where my question was coming from. Is it? Yeah.
The Burlingame shoreline is extremely windy much of the year, and I've been out to Burlingame Point to the Facebook campus many times, and it is sometimes it's surprisingly almost difficult to walk, because it's so windy. So we're anticipating heavy winds, and we're really part of the idea of the landform embankment and the dense planting buffer, multi-layered planting buffer, is to create a south-facing, wind-sheltered series of outdoor spaces that overlook the lagoon. That those things are really key to creating a comfortable year-round outdoor microclimate. So we believe that we've done kind of everything we can, and aside from building large architectural sort of perforated structure upwind to mitigate that.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? Good. Well, look, we'll move on to public comment stage. And John, I know you're going to let us know if we have hands raised. And actually, I just want to ask you, do we have hands raised? We do. Okay. So I will read the preamble just as a reminder for public comment. So now the presentations and the board questions are complete. Let's open the meeting to public comment. Any member of the public attending the meeting in person, please notify the board secretary if you'd like to make a comment. If you're attending online and would like to make a comment to our meeting via phone, you must press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand to make a comment, and to unmute or mute, press *6. You will be called on in the order that your hand was raised, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. John will note when you have 1 minute remaining. Please state your name and affiliation for the record at the beginning of your comment. As mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, if you would like to add your contact information to the interested parties list to be notified of future meetings concerning this project, please call or email Andrea Gaffney. So John, I'll leave it to you to coordinate the comment section.
Thank you, Chair. We have one hand raised. Gita Dev, please, your audio is unmuted. Please state your name and affiliation. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, UCDC Design Board Chair Jacinta. My name is Gita Dev. I am with the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter, but I'm also with the Sierra Club's Bay Alive campaign, which is a campaign of the 3 chapters around the Bay to make sure that with sea level rise, the San Francisco Bay ecology stays healthy. Therefore, I really appreciate some of the comments of a couple of the board members. The question I had actually was almost related to Kevin Gardner's presentation and along with Len Madiman. And I wanted to thank them, and I want to thank the developer here for very good presentations. The question I had was something that several board members also raised, but I would like a clarification. And that is that Kevin Gardner and Len Madiman said that the setbacks, the 100-foot setback, is really a land banking for the uncertainties of future sea level rise. And in looking at this particular building, I question the encroachment, the very slight encroachment into the 100-foot setback, which seems to me is something that could easily be avoided. And if the land banking is for uncertainties, it seems to me that for design reasons, this is a design review board, that particular encroachment could be quite damaging, quite annoying, should one need some flexibility in driving around the corner as the sea levels rise. So that's one question I would raise. The other would be—
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I also would like to note that for bird safety and for bird safe design and for considerations that this is a major habitat area and a wonderful habitat area, that all lighting, exterior lighting be shielded, and that all building lighting also be turned off at night. That's an important design consideration. Also, if there's a sculpture and it's lighted, that lighting be turned off at night. There are very good bird safe ordinance that, and night lighting ordinance that Cupertino, the city of Cupertino, has passed, which may be something that City of Burlingame and Kevin Gardner may want to look at because it would be very useful along the bay frontage. In general, I have questions about the 100-foot setback and the possibility of encroachment into that was mentioned if this is truly a land banking for the uncertainties of sea level rise and the need for space. And particularly, as one board member mentioned, the need for setbacks for nature, for the sea levels to rise, and for the marshes to—
Thank you very much. Your time is up for your
Thank
comments.
you so much.
Any questions?
John, further public comment?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, and we appreciate those points that Ms. Gita Dev just made, and I would ask the board to take that into consideration as we are talking. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so we will move on now to the board discussion and advice section, and we have, as usual, some questions. There are 4 questions that we've been asked to specifically respond to by the staff and the team. The first question addresses, how do these public spaces feel public, and does the project proposal allow for the shoreline to be enjoyed by the greatest number of people? So this is really about, being able to actually perceive these public spaces as public. So just comments, advice, thoughts on that? Andrew. Go ahead.
I wonder maybe if you could put the site plan up, that might be a useful reference. Is that possible? Just so that we're kind of all talking about the same areas and people understand it. I think generally this is a really nice project and it's doing a lot of great benefits to a not particularly current condition that's that attractive. One concern I had was about whether the site, and that's why I asked the question about the access to the parking. I mean, I am concerned that parking is going to be pretty hard to find, and it's going to feel very private because it's a big commercial structure there, and the parking, I mean, unless you really know about it and you see that sign, you won't find it. But even the pedestrian access, if you're coming along Anza, I mean, I guess a lot of people will come probably along the Bay Trail, but if you were to be coming along Anza Boulevard, the little path that goes down to the public access, actually go back, I think it was, yeah, the overall site plan is probably good. The little, right now, if you're coming, for example, if you went to that little bit of public access on the west side of the lagoon, and you'd come across Anza Boulevard, there's like a little kind of pedestrian roundabout that takes you down to the Bay Trail. It's pretty obvious. But in this current condition, if you're coming in either direction from Anza, let's say if you're coming from the west, it'd be so easy to miss that little diagonal path down to get to the public access. And then you've got the emergency vehicle access, which I'm assuming isn't meant to be a pedestrian path. That's more like a vehicular path.
It is not, and because of the grade change,
right,
it's actually not ADA accessible.
Right.
Although,
and then you would be at the building, and you'd sort of have missed it all. And then if you're coming even from the west, you might also kind of miss that path. So I guess I just have a question about whether that little connector path to Anza and that intersection there, that's a little tight kind of, could that be more prominent, or is there some way to make sure that people who are on Anza know that this is here and this isn't just a private kind of development of the office structure?
Yeah.
Because I think if you're on the Bay Trail, it's very obvious that it's a kind of this public park. I mean, it feels very welcoming. But if you're coming from these other directions, it seems less obvious. And I think if you're on Airport Boulevard, you're unlikely as a pedestrian to walk across in front of the office lobby, because that's just going to feel like it's the entrance to a big commercial structure.
So just a reminder, this is board discussion stage, at the end you can make a comment. So.
But thank you for showing the plan, that's helpful. Anyway, that's I think that's my comment about the sort of public qualities.
Yeah. And, Andrew, I'm just going to follow up on that, because last month we reviewed 2 other projects in this area. We saw the plan earlier of the totality of these new proposed projects. And I think each of them has a challenge in some way. I think it's a greater challenge here because the main entrance really does conceal, if you are not on the trail itself, really does conceal, parking in the lovely public space. And the character does look more like corporate campus-like character than perhaps visually cueing you that it's public. I mean, I actually wonder when you start to see the aggregation of these different sites and these spaces that are being created, I think it would be great for Burlingame to really push a public awareness of this network of public spaces that are being created, and find ways to do that. It might be the type of online communication of, great public spaces in Burlingame, but I think they really have to be communicated as public in as many ways as possible. But on the site itself, that was why I asked about the berm on Anza, and in relation to that secondary path. I just wonder if there could be I get why you want to wrap the berm, and I get there's the grade change up to along Anza Boulevard. So this becomes a subtle point, but where that secondary path comes out, I feel like, if there was some way to massage that, maybe open up or adjust the grades immediately adjacent to the path, just to give a little clearer view down that path, and signage. And I know there's signage, I think, at the EVA. I mean, we've got the signage diagram. There's signage at the airport entrance, I believe. But I just think we should be, we really should past the, I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think trying to really open up that secondary path would be helpful. Gary, what do you think? Oh, sorry.
You call me Jerry.
Oh, I was looking at you.
I haven't been Jerry for a long time.
The new Gary. Okay. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I feel it's such a kind of disappointment that the EVA can't be the pedestrian way in that is ADA accessible. That's what you're saying, right?
It is ADA accessible, but the slope is not ADA accessible. No, because the way the grade is steeper. There's no way to fix that. We could put in a series of, 80 to 30% range landings with rails.
But just to go straight line.
We really should be discussing this at a much board,
yeah.
We'll come back. So I know it's really tempting. We're all here in person, but let's.
Short of that, I just agree. I think there needs to be an opening. You need to be there needs to be a wider throat or a funnel or something that will let people know that the space is in there. I think that the curving path probably is going to be hard to even achieve that there. But I feel this opening next to the building would let people know that there's public parking there.
And I also wondered, Tom, if there's parking spaces along opposite the building on the access drive in, and I wondered if you could flip the 12 spaces down to that lower side opposite the building. At least you might see it coming in.
I mean, it's still pretty far from. Like everybody's pointing out, this is not really a very feasible public access from the airport, but you can at least see it from the street maybe a little better, and have ADA access. That would be beneficial. I don't know if there's some way to improve the feeling and the width of the public access. It looks very tight.
We didn't ask a clarifying question about the function of those spaces along the front of the building. I presume they're visitor spaces as ADA, but if you could even eliminate, say at the entrance off airport, if you could eliminate that section of parking and even just, it would be good if there was a secondary path that could actually follow along the property line in from.
If it could be parallel to one, I'm sure that's great to have problems with it.
So this is a question of how public should. So I think these are some thoughts and reactions. I think I would say on question one, there's probably a shared sentiment on the board that anything that can be done to increase the sense of public visibility of the entry ways into the site, the paths, both the Bay Trail plus the secondary paths and access points, the proponents should think about it as they continue to develop the plan. And the parking, yeah.
And I think in sort of thinking about that, it seems to make sense in my mind to prioritize the pedestrian connection to airports, which is where the buses are. It's where the non-Bay Trail bicycle traffic probably should be. It's where the shuttles run. So if somebody's going to get off, taking transit in this area, they would be dropped off there. Anza quickly sort of turns into like a freeway off-ramp. It's sort of very abrupt as you sort of move to the south. But this issue of sort of the long-term resiliency of the underpass, it's in, maybe it's actually good to sort of think about that, the southern front door of this building as sort of a future sort of way that you actually would be getting back up to airport and making your way across on the Bay Trail. So, but there's a lot of ways that probably could be more public, and I think also just the treatment of the ground plane and thinking about the materials, and maybe that's more like sort of a pedestrian surface that you can drive on as opposed to a driving surface that you can walk next to. Just thinking about that sort of area as maybe just opening that up to the public it's sort of where you would have an opportunity to interact with people inside the building, which I think also feels more public. I would love for that to wrap around the corner. Maybe that's something that can come up at the Planning Commission meeting, but just sort of thinking about the public frontage of that building and interacting. I think I'm a little nervous about a 6-story parking garage next to a park and that environment of natural surveillance and sort of other things that can occur in that environment. It's not an ideal situation. And it's a little bit outside of our purview, but just thinking about the public experience, being in a really wonderful sloped lawn with southern orientation, sort of being looked over by 6-story parking garage. I think there's a little bit of disconnect there that I would hope that the design of the building could become more complementary to sort of the great public space that's actually being established at the ground plane. So, Tom.
You know, that point you just raised, you know, the choice of paving materials, potentially making it more, you know, making that access way from Airport Boulevard more appealing. I mean, if you look at the grey tone on the Bay Trail, and let's just say you imagine a pedestrian type of pavement that connected across all those parking spaces, and that the lobby plaza paving didn't go out that far, and you just a strip of more pedestrian-oriented paving. It could be a visual signal that, you know, I'm really suggesting you could eliminate a lot of the parking or parallel park, but
yeah, I was going to make one more comment, Tom, and then I'll stop talking. But when we saw the other two projects, I think what I was trying to sort of understand is that the airport was originally like the back of everything, because you would drive to these projects and you would drive into a parking lot and then you would go to where you were. That the new development pattern is sort of transitioning in a way that it's like reorienting to airport. And so I think that that's justification for thinking about how the public access in this area might be changing over time, and how it might be more important to sort of establish those cross connections between the Bay Trail and the sort of primary people route, which appears to be airport. And this area was also conceptualized when there was no transit. You know, it's a very different experience on your, so that's, I think, I'm trying to, our charge is sort of also evolving, but I'm thinking about for maximizing public access, that seems to be an important connection to make.
Tom.
I just want to express very strong support for designing the drop-off and the parking coming off airport as a shared space. I think that's the right way to think about it. So people that are arriving to the building are using it. Also, people that are coming through to the park are using it, and that the public parking is easily identifiable there. And I think that would solve a lot of these problems. You might lose some head-on parking spots to get room to do that, but it might be really worth it. But on the other hand, I also want to say, you know, that a lot has been done to create this park that they didn't have to do. And I think that still a lot of people, maybe more, maybe the majority will still arrive to it from the Bay Trail, and it will feel very welcoming and public. And I think that and I like the grading that kind of enriches that thing. Yeah. My only concern is that the plaza looks a little unformed as yet, a little casual there. It seems like it might be a lot of hardscape. But
well, Gary, it's a good segue into question 2, which was, you know, just our thoughts, considerations on how the Shoreline Plaza and Lawn would host events, activities, and, you know, so you might want to just comment on that, or Bob, I think, wants to weigh in on question 2.
Are we on question 2 now?
Yes.
Okay. Can I talk? Yes, okay, thanks. So that was really an interesting discussion. I really appreciate the presentation. You know, I have this issue being kind of a ecological restoration engineer. I've done a lot of that. And when I see this, I see an opportunity to create a wetland right where you have the plaza. And as you indicated, the base flood elevation is the still water level because there aren't really much to worry about in terms of waves in the lagoon, which is different than on the other side, which makes me think that this rock slope protection isn't really necessary. And it could easily be transformed into what we call a marsh sill, where you just kind of flatten it around mean high water, and if there are any waves, that'll knock down the waves, and then you can have a perched marsh behind it. In this case, I think you could potentially have an even better connection to the mud flat. So you have an ecotone from the flat to the marsh, and then upland space where with sea level rise, that whole ecotone could migrate or transgress, as we call it. And I think you could still have public access and space, and you might attract a whole nother group of folks, like the person that spoke from the Sierra Club, that might be interested in having this nice ecotone and watching the birds and the like. And it is nice to have oaks down, you know, like a grassy hill with like oak trees in particular. You see a lot of that in Marin County. It's kind of really beautiful, and it comes down to the marsh, and you get even a better ecotone. So that's what I see, and I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity that we're locking in, once again, just because somebody filled the bay and put rock slope protection around the perimeter. We're just kind of locking that in. We're putting the bay trail where it is and not thinking about that alternatives. And, but I do like what you've done, and I appreciate what you've done. It's just, it's kind of what I always see around the bay, and I guess as somebody that likes the environment, it's a little frustrating for me, and I think it's a missed opportunity here. Maybe there's some other opportunities more broadly through this area. I know you have the restoration on the northern shore, that project, which we've heard. So I'll just put that out there if someone wants to talk about it. And while I'm speaking, because I only have one other thing to say that I'm aware of right now, I am a little disappointed in the building cutting into the shoreline band. I understand that there's work being done elsewhere, so I understand the idea of that being compensated. But even beyond that, the idea that the finished floor is at plus 13, whereas you're raising the perimeter to 16, which means that the finished floor is going to be 3 feet below your flood level with, you know, 6 feet of sea level rise, makes me wonder if you have some sort of adaptation strategy. I'm sorry, Kevin, you're looking at me. I don't know if I make sense. I'm sorry, I'm saying something that might not make sense.
Don't worry, Bob. The proponent can comment at the end. So. Yeah,
and so I just want to have this discussion. The idea that the finished floor is in the 100-foot band and is 3 feet below the future sea level rise criterion, which isn't that unusual in the bay because we have a lot of dike bailins that are low. But it raises the question, what happens when it rains? Where does the water go? Does it go to the public space? So I understand you have adaptation for the perimeter where it is now. I just don't understand how the park will be adapted and how the runoff and the other, how the development, which encroaches into the shoreline band and kind of right up to the park, will work with all that. So maybe, you know, just to throw it on the table, maybe there's an opportunity for some sort of, you know, adaptation plan that's a little broader, that might include ecology and more resilience than having the floor low and right up against the park. Yeah, and less riprap, and I understand why that was done, and at least here it's rock and not concrete and rubble like we see a lot in the East Bay and stuff. But yeah, if there's no waves and you have some space, it would be relatively easy to create an area for marsh, and then the marsh will provide some erosion protection. You just need a flatter slope, and there's guidance for that that's finally coming out. But I understand that this is really different than what the applicant has, and I certainly understand that it may not be on the table, but I just wanted to express that perspective.
Bob, I'm
Thank
glad
you
you
for
brought it
listening.
up. It certainly went through my mind as well. I think what we want to do is to just keep, let's keep that, it's an important idea that you're talking about, and I think you will find a lot of support for ideas like that. Yes, please, go ahead.
I guess I'm just even wondering whether, at that 100-foot shoreline band, whether the building could be chamfered even just at the ground floor. I mean, then maybe, the corner could cantilever out, but at the ground floor, because then you'd have a little bit more visibility around to where the public parking is too, as you started coming around the building, you just see more. So that's just one suggestion without having to chop the whole corner off.
Thank you. Okay, well, Bob's addressed question 2 in I think a very interesting way. And Gary, Tom, you were talking before about the plaza, and can you maybe add to that comment in terms of, possibilities for how you could see the plaza maybe being enhanced?
Yeah, I think it could, it feels like a bit much of hardscape, which would be understandable if there's going to be an all-hands meeting and they'll bring 100 people out to use it, but it's got something cutting through the middle. It feels a little unformed there for all that amount of hardscape. I think I would either give a little stronger frame in some way or reduce the amount of hardscape, bring the lawn down more. It's just not clear how people would use it right now.
Okay. Any other comments on question 2? Does the amount of furnishings look sufficient? I appreciate the fact, we said this last week, but we're providing our reactions here, but the context to all of this is a dramatic enhancement of what is there at the moment, and we really appreciate what the proponent is doing here. So that's the context to these comments. Okay, let's go to question 3. I think we've touched on this already, but is there anything else we want to add to in terms of, how the public access areas and the amenities could be potentially more resilient or adaptive to sea level rise? Any additional comments?
Yeah, I think it's a great, really clear presentation. I appreciate that, very thoughtful, and I love the park. But I just want to second the point that Geeta brought up, the corner that encroaches. I mean, we don't often see architecture inside the shoreline band, and when we do, if it's an amenity or, a gathering place or maybe some kind of light structure, we kind of go with it. But there's a lot of building in the setback there in the shoreline band. And I'm only bringing it up because I think it applies to all the questions. A little bit of relief on that corner solves a whole bunch of problems because, I'm seeing that there's the garage entrance, a ton of parking, there's the visitor parking, and it's kind of a pinch point even when you come in on the Bay Trail. It is going to feel a little bit like the, service side of the building facing, the bay or the lagoon. So I don't know if there's, I look at that property, which is to the northwest against Anza Boulevard, and I wish the building could, you could trade some of that green space on Anza Boulevard and put a little larger buffer, down towards the bay. And I don't know, I guess there's a setback there, something that you're trying to honor, and it's not really within our purview anyway. But it does seem like that corner, for all the reasons mentioned, could use, a little extra space for adaptation later, as well as just the general feel of the place.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, the final question we've been asked to respond on is, are there any other improvements that could help the public access experience along the shoreline? Any other thoughts? Actually, I do want to weigh in just on the lighting comment that we heard from in public comment, and I actually think it is terrific. The lighting plan looked great, I thought, but I just feel like, and I'm sure all these are cut-off light fixtures, but we should make sure that the uplighting component of any of these exterior light fixtures is controlled so that the lighting is not going to disrupt bird life. But I think it's a great advantage to have that sense of enhanced safety for users of the Bay Trail. Any other thoughts in relation to other opportunities? Thank you. Good discussion, as always. And so I think that wraps up the board discussion and comments. And I would just, I'm not going to run through all the points that we covered, but I think at a high level, I think the really critical points here is, at the conclusion of the first review, we would ask that there would be, as much thought given to how we can enhance the visibility and the ease of access for public coming into the site, and to try and make that balance between corporate campus and public space as try and make the public space as strongly visible as possible. Having said that, I think the design overall, I think we're all very impressed with the work that's been done, and I'm grateful every time I see a project come in where there's significant enhancements to the Bay Trail, which you're doing, and setting up another piece of this very important network within Burlingame and the broader region. So really thank you for the thoughtful design. And also, Gary, you often comment on the plant material, but I really appreciate seeing a project where there's a clear intention to move away from what we often see on corporate campus plant pallets and move to something which is native and should do well in this environment. So thank you for that as well. So there are a number of detailed things here. The staff, Ashley, you and the team can take that forward with the proponent going forward. And I think just to conclude this, we would ask for a brief response from the proponent to what we've said.
Yeah, those were all very, very helpful comments. Just to quickly go through some of them, I think the connection up to the Anza streetscape from the Bay Trail, that could definitely be widened. Just for reference, that's shown as 8 feet wide. 8 feet wide is pretty comfortably wide. It could definitely go to 10 or 12. There is a BCDC signage shown on the signage plan at the top of that. That sidewalk is also provides access only to the freeway, right, to the west. So there are really no people coming from the freeway into our site. So you have to really think of circulation being in a single direction where you will naturally funnel down the slope, particularly with the signage, and maybe a slightly widened or a flared opening. I think there are some simple design solutions, but I think from the east, with the arc of that leading you down to the open space of the bay with a 4.8% slope that's just a sloped walk, not a ramp, I think that will feel very comfortable. And I wouldn't expect, because there are no destinations to the west, there's going to be very few people that use that corridor because there's nothing to go to except for the freeway. There's a very small BCDC sort of scrap of the trail on the other side of the lagoon, but it's like there's no people that use it. So it's a very disconnected segment of streetscape that will have very little use. So I think we need to think about making sure that we're doing something that's appropriate to the level of use that we anticipate in that area. I think the visibility is really important down into the open space for a security and for access perspectives. So I do think, I liked the idea, maybe we could connect circulation with the EVA somehow. Maybe we can enhance the views or view corridors down into the open space from Anza Boulevard. But we do anticipate that to be a very, very low intensity public use streetscape. Currently it's like a 4.5 or 5 foot wide sidewalk right along the street with no buffer, and it rarely gets used. And there will be no future development in that direction. I think the connectivity from Airport Boulevard, we really think that that is predominantly the strong connection. There was an idea that was mentioned about, linking Airport Boulevard to the shoreline with special paving so that there is a visual cue. Our material diagram does show that entire corridor as concrete unit pavers connecting the Airport Boulevard Plaza with the shoreline. So there will be a really strong visual cue. It's also, like a 22-foot wide plaza extending all the way back from the Airport Boulevard Plaza back to beyond the lobby plaza. And then it transitions to a 7 or 8 foot corridor. But we do think that there is a plaza connection that wraps in an L shape around the building, kind of in the portico area that will naturally funnel people down towards the bay, particularly with appropriate signage. So I do think that can be enhanced. We can definitely look at widening. There would be some potential solutions of turning the perpendicular parking to parallel parking along the south edge, maybe, which would give us more space for a wider plaza path connection. I think that's a clever solution. We are trying to provide adequate short-term visitor parking and BCDC parking and all of that. So there's some, push and pull with the team, and everybody's interests are a little bit different.
I'll just jump in for a minute because we're very happy for you to work on these details with the staff. And because there are lots of ways you could, start to. So we appreciate the fact that you're receptive to the thoughts that we've offered tonight. So
great.
Yeah.
Just one final thing about the idea of the shoreline marsh condition, and is a marsh more of a community benefit than sort of recreational seating space or event areas? And I think that's something for everybody to consider. As Gary mentioned, that pinch point doesn't really allow for layback, even if the building was brought back 19 feet and didn't protrude the 19 feet into the shoreline band, it would still be a pinch point. And there's literally no room to create a laid-back shoreline edge that would be required to create that shallow sloped marsh gradient that was discussed. We also have the restriction of the Anza embankment on the other side that literally touches the Bay Trail, so there's no room to lay back the land on that side either. So it's actually pretty infeasible to create a marsh with the various pushes and pulls that we have in this area.
Again, we'll leave that all for further discussion with staff, but we appreciate those thoughts. You know the site intimately, so we offer these comments.
So to confirm, it does not need to come back to the DRB.
Would you like to see this again? I think we can leave this with the staff, but the comments we've made and the thoughts we've offered on, making it as public as possible from Airport Boulevard, that's the big takeaway for us. So, Thank you, Ashley. Okay, and look, we really appreciate the thought you've given to creating this large new public space. So thanks very much, everyone. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break and reconvene for the next item. Ashley, let us know when we can start the review.
We're ready to start.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Thank you, team. So we move to agenda item 6, which is the first review of an office and R&D campus development at 200 Twin Dolphin in Redwood City. And to remind you of the project order, again, we will have a staff introduction. We'll follow that with the project proponent presentation, board clarifying questions, public comment, board discussion and summary, and then a project proponent response, a brief response. And so with that, BCDC Permit Analyst Shruti Sinha will introduce the project. Shruti, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair McCann. The second project for review tonight is an office and R&D redevelopment project located in Redwood Shores. Before we discuss the project, again, we would like to begin by acknowledging that the majority of the land in this area was once water and historic tidal flats located near Lamchin, the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone. We offer gratitude to the indigenous people who are the original stewards of the bountiful natural resources of the Bay Area. 200 Twin Dolphin is located in Redwood Shores in San Mateo County. These are vicinity maps. The existing public access is located within the Commission's 100-foot shoreline band at the site. The required public access includes 5 designated public access parking stalls and a 900-foot long section of the Belmont Creek Trail. The existing trail is an unimproved 4 to 5 foot wide earthen footpath, generally following and defining the upland boundary of the creek's riparian corridor. The existing landscape upland of the trail is predominantly open, ornamental lawn and pine canopy. There is currently no pedestrian connectivity from the city sidewalks and or adjacent regional trail systems to the Belmont Creek Trail. The current trail furnishings include 1 wooden bench at a creekside overlook west of the trailhead and 1 wooden bench north of the trailhead adjacent to an existing art installation. The trail does not meet accessibility requirements. BCDC staff made a site visit last Friday on May 6th, and we did note a picnic table and grill located at the west terminus of the existing trail, but this does not appear to be a BCDC required public access improvement for this or the adjacent site. These are photos taken on our site visit. Photo 1 shows a family of ducks in the Belmont Creek at the site. Photo 2 shows a public shoreline access sign leading to the Belmont Creek Trail and public shore parking spaces to the right. Photos 3 and 4 show the Belmont Creek Trail at the site. And photo 5 shows the off-site section of the Belmont Creek Trail that the project proposes to improve. Here is some regional context for parks and public access areas. The existing Bay Trail alignment is dark blue and brown, and other local trails are shown in magenta. Nearby parks and open space are shown in green. Again, at some of the regional settings of the project location, BCDC's vulnerability mapping tool shows the project area as having moderate social vulnerability based upon the 2020 census data. However, there are some areas to the west and southeast of the project site that have high and highest social vulnerability. Demographics for this area include children under 5, people over 65 and alone, people with no high school degree, people with limited English proficiency, people who are not U.S. citizens, and people with very low income. Regarding potential sea level rise and using current site elevations, this map shows what 24 inches of sea level rise would look like if the site remained unchanged. 24 inches of sea level rise for the low risk aversion scenario is equivalent to a king tide in 2050, which shows no flooding on the site. For the medium to high risk aversion scenario, 24 inches of sea level rise is equivalent to the mean higher high water level, which would also not cause any flooding on the site. This map shows what 66 inches of sea level rise would look like at the site if unchanged. 66 inches of sea level rise for the low risk aversion scenario is equivalent to a 5-year storm plus sea level rise at the end of the century, which shows some flooding and overtopping of a large portion of the site. For the medium to high risk aversion scenario, 66 inches of sea level rise is equivalent to the 100-year storm at mid-century and mean higher high water in the year 2090. The San Francisco Estuary Institute Adaptation Atlas identifies this site as a developed area. To conclude this introduction, we have summarized the Bay Plan policies and guideline questions that apply to this project. Does the board have any clarifying questions at this point?
Are there any questions? No. I think we could move ahead, Trudy. Thank you.
All right. So now Adam Volker, Rich Sharp, and Margot Sulmont will present the project.
Good evening, BCDC team and Design Review Board. We appreciate you being here late on a Monday evening. My name is Adam Volker. I'm here with Trammell Crow Company with my colleagues Maris Ota and Margot Sulmont. And we're here to introduce 200 Twin Dolphin to you. So we Trammell Crow Company, or TCC as we may be referred to, are the owner and developer. Other key team members include DGA. On the line is Bob Bracamonte and Leonardo Buendia. Studio 5 Design, represented by Rich Sharp. BKF as our civil engineer, and WRA as our environmental consultant. Just for a little bit of background on the site, this is one of the first developments that was realized in Redwood Shores following Mobile Land Company's ownership of the larger area. And the property was originally developed in the early 1980s with single-story, low-rise office condominiums comprising approximately 50,000 square feet. The prior owner, Sandhill Property, entitled the property for approximately 200,000 square feet, taking advantage of the in-place zoning. It did not in-place general plan. And they commenced their entitlement application in 2018 and achieved full entitlement of the site in March of 2021. We, TCC, acquired the site in January of 2022 And our hope is to start site work and demolition of the existing improvements in the second half of this year. The site does have an in-place permit. As Shruti highlighted, we will call out a slightly revised 100-foot BCDC line, just given the change in time that we've worked with WRA. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Margot.
Thank you. I will touch upon the existing conditions. Shruti did a great job reviewing those elements, but we'll quickly go over that. So as the site is in Redwood Shores on the interior side of that neighborhood, this map showcases the existing trail network in Redwood Shores, and it's pretty extensive. The Bay Trail is shown in blue, and you'll see it follows Twin Dolphin Drive and connects to the Oracle Park network and to the greater network around the residential areas. Our site is on the other side of Twin Dolphin Drive, and our focus is on the Belmont Creek Trail. So you'll see the dashed line here is the current Belmont Creek Trail, starts at Marine Parkway and dead ends on Shoreway Road, and it's about half a mile. Our project proposes improvements for a portion of that trail, and more importantly, finds a way to connect that trail to the greater network in Redwood Shores. So zooming in on our property, you'll see our property site in the dashed line, 4.5 acre site, and then the 2 permit areas. So the first one is the one that Shruti called out, which is the one that takes a corner of our site, as you see. And then the second permit area, also from 1982, is part of Redwood Shores, and as part of our entitlements are also improving that in terms of enhancing the trail. So those are called out. The existing trail is shown in pink, and as you'll see, there's no existing connection that continues that trail through Twin Dolphin Drive or provides a connection to the Bay Trail across Twin Dolphin Drive. You also notice the updated shoreline band that we've done, again, slightly offset from the current permits from the 1980s. There also is existing public parking in that green box. And one of the things that we've noticed on the site is the access to the Belmont Trail is really interior. It's hard to see it when you're driving through Twin Dolphin Drive. There's an existing bike lanes. There's a lot of people walking through the Bay Trail across Twin Dolphin Drive, but it's hard to really notice how you would enter or access the Belmont Creek Trail. So our project provides a way for that to be more visible and for a way for people walking through Belmont Creek, the Bay Trail, to enjoy Belmont Creek. The following slide shows some of the existing conditions. We think the Belmont Creek Trail is pretty pleasant. It, has a great tree canopy, provides great views of the creek and of the existing vegetations around the creek, but it really needs improvement in terms of being widened, uncovered, made ADA accessible, improving of signage, and more importantly, increasing the visibility and the connection to the rest of the Bay Trail. So I'll pass it on to Rich from Studio 5 to talk more in detail about the proposed improvements.
Thanks, Margot. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you, Rich.
Okay, just making sure. All right, so I'll go through the next series of slides here. I'd like to start with this first 2 diagrams that depict site circulation and public access as it relates to the Belmont Creek Trail and its relationship to the 200 Twin Dolphin site and adjacent trail systems, as Margot alluded to. The upper diagram, the first diagram, represents existing conditions that include the Belmont Creek Trail itself and its relationship to the Bay Trail and the Redwood Shores Lagoon Trail on the north side of Twin Dolphin Drive, and the existing 200 Twin Dolphin site development to the east of the creek, which includes 6 one-story buildings and perimeter parking that we're showing there. There's an existing trailhead that we saw in some of the previous photographs with the designated parking. It's along the east side of the site development. As Margaret said, the signage is limited. It's one small post panel location at the trailhead. The trailhead actually sits south of the designated parking. And so the signage and trailhead are both very limited in terms of visibility from Twin Dolphin Drive. There are 2 overlook seating areas that are represented here with the green dots. The one is southwest of the trailhead at the bend in the creek, overlooks the creek. The one at the northwest sits adjacent to the existing artwork installation, also has spectacular views to the Redwood Shores Lagoon to the north. As you can see in the diagram, there's currently no pedestrian access to or from the Belmont Creek Trail to the Bay Trail, to the Redwood Shores Lagoon Trail, or to the pedestrian path along Shoreline Drive. And there's also no pedestrian connectivity through the site, only vehicular parking loop. So there's currently no visibility to the Belmont Creek Trail and trailhead from Shoreline Drive, and limited visibility from Twin Dolphin due to the trailhead sitting south of the designated parking. The trail appears to be a day use only trail, as there is currently no pathway lighting, and we think that's in consideration of the creek riparian habitat. So by contrast, the second slide is our proposed diagram, demonstrates a number of visual and physical access improvements. Yeah, can we back up there? Thank you. These improvements include the trail restoration, as Margaret said, widening to 8 feet, surface improvements, improving and upgrading the overlook seating areas that are demonstrated as the small green dots, relocated, what we're calling a relocated trailhead, where we push the trailhead north to engage Twin Dolphin Drive and provide additional seating. We're introducing a new pedestrian path that's proposed along Twin Dolphin Drive that sits within the public access easement within the Twin Dolphin property. I can explain that in a later slide. Along that path, we're providing additional public open space seating that will be introduced along this new public access path. And then we're also providing connectivity to the adjacent trail systems with a proposed signalized pedestrian crossing at Twin Dolphin Drive, as well as at the intersection of Shoreline Drive and Twin Dolphin Drive. And you can see at the crossing of the Twin Dolphin Drive, we're proposing a centralized landscape amenity that will anchor that crossing for people coming and going from the Bay Trail. Secondary access is demonstrated here that will be provided through the center of the site along the emergency vehicle drive, which also offers visual access now from Shoreline Drive to the relocated trailhead. We can move to the next slide. So this is our overall site plan. Gives some context to the Belmont Creek Trail improvements. Here we're trying to establish the importance of the relationship between the trail improvements and the 200 Twin Dolphin site development to establish a more comprehensive landscape solution. The master plan illustrates several key components, includes the Belmont Creek Trailhead relocation that I mentioned. You can see in the center of the screen there. The 100-foot BCDC shoreline band that establishes the limit of development and showing that our project is respecting that easement. You can see in the creek corridor itself, the mean high water line mark within the Belmont Creek banks, which is only at, I believe, elevation 5 foot. And you can see along Twin Dolphin Drive, outlined with a pink dashed line, is our required 20,000 square foot public access easement along the north side of the development. You can see the new development shown here on the plan that includes a 200,000 square foot 5-story office R&D building and a 5-story parking structure. The surface parking and vehicular circulation have been limited to the southern perimeter of the site for garage access, short-term parking, and the drop-off down in the southeast corner. There's an emergency vehicle access and service drive that I mentioned on the diagram that's provided through the middle of the site, which opens up the visual access through the site. The remainder of the site perimeter and core has been maintained as open space. And this is to preserve existing perimeter tree canopy, to extend public access, and to provide site amenities throughout the perimeter of the project. The vignettes that we have shown here on the plan are intended to highlight some of the key site and landscape improvements, but in the interest of time, we can address those on the enlarged plans. So as we walk through the design on the following slides, we can jump to the next slide. We've established 3 design measures that are guiding our design process and that respond to the BCDC objectives for open space access. And they are to improve trail access and connectivity, to improve the trail experience, and to improve trail conditions. So this plan we're looking at now is our trailhead and open space enlargement plan. And I basically have 2 plans here, one that's concentrated on the trailhead and the 200 twin parcel site, and then a follow-up plan that will show the continuation to the west of the trail. And what we've done on this plan is dialed back the tree canopy to show the layout of the site work more clearly. So if I move from east to west on this plan, we can start with the existing pedestrian path along Shoreline Drive. That previously terminated at Twin Dolphin Drive, which is where we're proposing to connect with our proposed public access walk. This access walk extends, it's 8 foot wide, so it parallels the trail width, and it extends the entire north side end of the site and connects to the proposed Belmont Creek trailhead as well as to the Twin Dolphin crossing. Access is provided from this walk to the north building entry as well into the west, what we're calling the west site amenity terrace. It's at the center of the screen. The walk is positioned away from the back of curb in order to preserve the existing pine canopy and respect the contouring that's occurring there that those pine trees sit in. And that walkway is punctuated with public seating. And we envision this public seating as consistent with the more monolithic seating that we're proposing at the Belmont Creek trailhead seating. And by monolithic, you can see the images at the top of the screen. And we're looking at, rather than introducing catalog benches, that we would put something in that has more of a sense of permanence and respects this idea of sea level rise, resiliency with more permanent fixtures. The Twin Dolphin crossing is positioned to provide clear and direct access to both the Redwood Shores Lagoon Trail as well as to the Bay Trail. The Bay Trail is essentially the sidewalk on the north side of Twin Dolphin Drive for reference. There are bike paths within Twin Dolphin Drive that run on both the north and south side of the road. Conversely, as we move across that Twin Dolphin Trail access from the Bay Trail into the Belmont Creek Trail connection, we're positioning that crosswalk so it's aligned with what we're referring to as our central coastal garden, which is a featured landscape area off of the west site terrace. It's inspired by the historic tidal marsh landscape of this area and has a primary filtration function. It's sort of a low marsh area. We consider it sort of a wet meadow. We're currently working with a local artist to develop public art, and we anticipate situating the public art in this centerpiece landscape. As we move further west, we engage the Belmont Creek Trail and trailhead access. And you can see by shifting the trailhead north towards Twin Dolphin, we've established a stronger visual and physical connection to the trail. We're introducing what we're referring to as a trailhead knoll, which is an elongated landform that occupies the confluence area between the trail and the access path. This allows us to shape the trail experience. It allows us to integrate additional seating and to introduce understory canopy that improves the trail experience by reducing the presence of the parking structure and adjacent surface parking. The seating at this trailhead knoll is positioned to take advantage of the lagoon views, as well as views out over the creek riparian corridor. We anticipate signage at key locations For wayfinding, as you come across from the Bay Trail, it would point you in the direction of the Belmont Creek Trail. We anticipate post and panel signage for the designated parking and also for trailhead identification. Trail signage would obviously include the standard shoreline graphics for public shore access. If we move to the next slide, I can talk about existing overlooked improvements on the trail itself. So here's a section cut through the creek trail. This is taken right at the trailhead. You can see the mean high water line is the pink line down there at elevation 5. The existing trail is generally at elevation 10. In the vicinity of this new and improved trailhead, it sits slightly below 10 at like 975. So our goal would be to bring that up as part of this trailhead knoll improvement. You can see in the section that we're up at about 14 feet with the landform. That's all happening street side from the trail, so it doesn't impact any of the drainage patterns of the creek corridor and riparian habitat area. You can see what we're calling native and understory adaptive tree canopy that is positioned on the knoll that shuts down the elevation of the garage, and then the built-in seating that's sort of integrated into the trail knoll. And you can see the access path that's coming from the trail parking to the left. It brings you into the trail. So this is really splitting at the confluence of the trail. Next slide. We've introduced some views here, not quite as finished as the previous presentation, but communicates the intent. You can see the inlay on the perspective there that shows where the view is taken from. This is essentially at what we call the confluence of the Belmont Trail, which is running on the right side of the picture. The landscape to the right is the existing creek corridor, which we aren't touching. We want to respect that riparian corridor that's there. You can see the trail access path, the trailhead access paths coming in from the left-hand side, the seating that's integrated into the trailhead knoll, the signage that's positioned at the trailhead. And you can start to see the open space easement in the background there. And that view along the left-hand side is the emergency vehicle access corridor that opens up the trailhead visually to Shoreline Drive, which is in the distance in the background there. You can go to the next slide. This is a view looking west along the open space easement, or the public access easement, I'm sorry, along the front of the development, the north side of the development. That's Twin Dolphin Drive on the right. You can see the existing pine canopy that's being preserved by shifting the walkway. That landscape between the walkway and the back of curb, we see as a coastal restoration or a coastal plain type of landscape where we would do native and adaptive understory grasses and perennials to complement the pines. And then between the pathway and the development parcel, we've introduced a zone of landscape which allows us to introduce some understory, flowering understory canopy to bring down the scale of the pine trees for a better pedestrian experience moving down the pathway. You can see the trailhead in the distance because we've moved it forward. It just becomes this sort of continuous open space trail system. You move to the next slide. We're back to the second piece of the plan here. It sort of overlaps the trailhead, so I won't speak to that, but the continuation into the second permit area of the trail, you'll see the two overlook areas, one southwest of the trailhead and one northwest of the trailhead at the existing public art. And you can see that what we're trying to do is envelop that art piece with the landscape improvements at the ground plane. We're respecting the pine tree stands that are there, and again, introducing native trees at the trailhead, but we're trying to taper that landscape gesture off as we move west and bring it back to just conform improvements in addition to the trail surface improvements moving west, so that we don't have sort of this odd artificial line in the sand between ornamental lawn and more climate appropriate landscape that we're proposing for throughout the project. Next slide. So this goes back to a view. This is standing at more of the western edge of the trail, just past the artwork. The artwork sits in that bump out of DG that we don't have the artwork represented in this view. We have an interpretive signage piece there. You can see the improved bench at that overlook that takes advantage of proximity to the art as well as view to the lagoon, which is off to the left of the shot. You can see the trailhead in the distance and then the continuation of the open space as it moves along Twin Dolphin Drive. So again, we're trying to make this, take these trail improvements and make this big impactful landscape gesture that runs the entire length of the private property and public access easement. Next slide. And then I just wanted to touch on planting quickly. We've tried to establish zones within the project. Obviously, we want the plant palette to overlap and not have distinct landscape areas, but we're sort of theming them as we're calling the East Pine Tree Stand, the North Pine Tree Stand. At the center point, we have what we're referring to the coastal garden, and then what I mentioned, the trailhead knoll landform at the trailhead. And by comparison, the East Pine Tree Stand, because it's got a substantial amount of pine canopy, that understory in our mind would be quite simple, native and adaptive grasses mixed with perennials. We would position native shrubs in there to minimize maintenance issues with pine needles dropping. We'd increase the intensity of the plant layering as we move towards the building and introduce the understory tree canopy so that the seating experience is enriched as you move along that public access path. When you get to the center coastal garden, that is serving, as I said, a primary filtration function. So that's predominantly a reed-based or rush-based landscape. The embankments would be native shrubs, and then we would feature some native trees there or adaptive. We try and work with sort of a native coastal oak. We've heard some concerns about the soil type conditions in this area from the association. So unless we can scoop some of that out, we might move to something more like a southern live oak that would handle the wet feet in the proximity to the filtration garden. And then as we move towards the west, we get into and north, we get into what we call the North Pine Tree Stand, just beyond the trailhead. And again, that plant palette at the ground plane is quite simple, mostly grass, native grass base and perennials. And then on the trailhead knoll is where we would start to introduce some larger native shrubs like the California myrtle that would help at eye level start to shut down the parking structure in addition to the landform. Could move to the one other quick note back on that slide is that center coastal garden is where, when we do a lot of these native and adaptive schemes, for us it's important to introduce some strong texture. So we're suggesting a succulent overlay in that centerpiece garden. It's becoming a feature, for that west terrace to look out over that filtration garden. And so those embankments, we could really play up a lot of rich plant texture just to complement the kind of quieter native and adaptive plant selections. Go to the next slide. And this is, again, a continuation of that thinking where we carry that plant palette along that North Pine Tree Stand to capture that existing art installation. And then we sort of dial it back to the edge of the trail. And even though that from that point west is predominantly ornamental lawn, there is a fair amount of native manzanita that's tucked in there amongst the pines. And then obviously when you jump across the trail to the creek side, there's a lot of naturalized material that's happening there that kind of carries the habitat character along the project. The improvements to the trail would include some root pruning. There's obviously, to make it ADA compliant, we have to deal with some of the roots on some of the trees that are along this trail that have exposed themselves. So some of this would be conform and build up. Some of it would be root pruning, and obviously consistent widening to 8 feet for ADA, and improved stabilized DG surface for ADA compatibility. Go to the next slide. This is our tree disposition plan, and this shows the entirety of tree preservation and removal for the project. You can see the previous site was 6 small buildings with a lot of trees interspersed. Most of those are sweet gums and Canary Island pines, so nothing to really write home about in terms of preservation. But so those are being removed because of the development. The chartreuse colored trees are all of the protected trees that are either in the public right of way and or 12-inch in size. So you can see all around the perimeter and along the trail corridor itself, those are being preserved. And then the sort of grass green colored trees are our proposed trees. And you can see by the counts, we're removing 51 protected trees. They're protected only because they're 12-inch in caliber and larger. And the city doesn't differentiate between species for protected trees. And then there's 12 unprotected trees being removed. And currently we're only proposing 49 new trees. We have some ability to increase that, but because of the significant pine stands, we're not trying to overpopulate the site with trees. So our goal moving forward in review with the city would be to either upgrade the tree sizes, which are an option to offset the counts, and or provide in lieu fees to the city where we could plant appropriate trees in appropriate locations on other sites if we can't get them to fit on our project site. Next slide. So last couple of views here of the project. So again, this is from the trail, standing just in the creek corridor, essentially along the Belmont Trail, looking at the trail access path. And you can see the proximity to the lagoon across the street and the benefit of moving this trailhead forward so that you really feel like you're part of that view shed towards the lagoon. Next slide. And then this is a slide looking back west. This is right as the trail is, the open space path is slipping past that west terrace at the building and engaging the crosswalk over Twin Dolphin Drive to access the Bay Trail and the Redwood Shores Lagoon Trail. Next slide. Just another shot of the trail with that view down that emergency vehicle access corridor between the building and the parking garage. That also has a 4-foot pedestrian path. We consider it a secondary access, but it is in fact access out to Shoreline Drive and as well as visual access through the project. Next slide. And that concludes our presentation.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you, Adam, Margot, Rich. Really appreciate the comprehensive nature of the presentation and some of the big moves, which are really quite significant, and we will talk more about those. But before we move on to public comment, are there any clarifying questions from the board? Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, so how much sea level rise will this plan be able to accommodate while the trail is still accessible and functional? I wasn't sure I caught that. And regardless of what that amount is, I think it's probably somewhere around 2 to 3 feet. I'm just shooting from the hip there. So what happens with a higher amount of sea level rise? Is there a plan to adapt, or is there space to adapt? I actually have 2 questions, but that's my first one. we can, yeah, please, thank you.
Thank you. We bring Mike O'Connell from BKF to help answer that question. Hey, Mike.
Good evening, Board. Well, to answer your first question about how much sea level rise current team will accommodate, I think that's part of the risk assessment that Trammell Crow is going to complete so that we can get a better handle on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, we often, as I think somebody clarified earlier in the meeting, I think the BCDC policy is designed for at least mid-century. So I was just curious about that. I think that would be of interest to the staff. My second question is are there any plans to enhance the creek for ecology or flood hydraulics, hydrology? And I don't know if there's like a city or group that is interested in that creek, and if there are any opportunities to enhance the area on the creek side of the trail. I saw that your project limit is right on the trail. I don't know if that's because that's as far as you can go, or I was just wondering if there are any opportunities on the other side.
Yeah, there are existing permits for those areas, so we're respecting the existing permits, which are really limited to the path areas. And again, the same as part of our entitlements. The paths were part of our entitlements, but nothing beyond the creek, or including the creek.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Bob, just one other comment on that. Not that it is part of our scope necessarily, but we did look at. It sounds like there's it's what's called One Shoreline Belmont Creek Restoration and Flood Protection Project. I haven't been able to get into it far enough to see if that extends up into this zone or not. That would potentially change some of the existing conditions within that creek corridor that we could then respond to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other clarifications? All good? We'll move to public comment. John, anything?
There are no hands raised, Chair.
Okay.
Thank
Anyone in the room? Public comment? No? Okay. So we will move through the public comment to our next step here, which is to have our board discussion and advice. And there are 4 questions that we've been asked to look at. And maybe we could just have a plan put up. If someone could just put the plan back up, one of the plans, maybe the one with the tree removal, because you can sort of see what's going on at ground level on that quite clearly. And just a reminder of a couple of data points here. So the existing trail section that we're dealing with in that trailhead area is 4 to 5 feet wide and will be widened. Then there's the new easement being created along Twin Dolphin Drive, and I believe that adds about 600 linear feet of concrete pathways and landscape. And then we've got the connection, new connections. We've got the mid-block crosswalk connections. So this is a lot about connectivity, but then of course about all the other issues that we need to examine. So if we just go to the questions here, the first question is really about, can we do anything more here to make these public spaces feel public? And this is a very interesting combination of projects we're reviewing tonight, because it's almost the reverse of what we looked at before. But and maybe just to kick this off, I found the diagram for the old 82 permit diagram very interesting, because to one of the comments made earlier tonight, it was the series of 5 buildings with perimeter parking along Twin Dolphin Drive, and that parking has now been sort of captured into an easement, which I think is a great enhancement in terms of being able to create a sense of public, well, first of all, visibility, ease of access onto a public trail and then into the Belmont Creek Trail. But would others like to weigh in? Are there things that could be done to enhance the public nature of these spaces and obviously the smaller sculpture and lay-bys and so on, those areas should be considered. Any comments? Question one.
I think that the trails and the grading have a kind of a nice sensibility, and while it's not overly exposed, I mean, it's kind of sheltered from the street and the trees overhead. I feel like it's enough in terms of feeling public. It feels like a public walk system, public trail system, and things seem to connect well. And so, in terms of feeling public, I think it works fine. There's a space here close to the street in where I think is their kind of more private courtyard, and it seems fair, I think, to think of that as a private courtyard. The thing that troubles me, honestly, is what has already been allowed to happen, which is all that parking and roadway inside the 100-foot ban. It's just nothing we can do about that, I guess.
It's a good question, but I think it's this is a pre-existing. This has been like this in the previous layout. Yeah, so it's. I don't know, Tom. My reaction to this is, it's a significant trade-off, but there's a big plus that's gained, like a massive plus actually, in terms of being able to make something of the Belmont Trail, a dramatic enhancement to the Belmont Trail and its usage. But every time we see the 100-foot shoreline band cut into by uses other than public space that people can enjoy, it's a compromise. Although I do appreciate the fact that the parking stalls have gone up from 5 to 6 for the public stalls, so that's good. And they're visible, which is also good. Okay, let's go to question 2. Are there any other additional improvements that could improve the public access experience along the shoreline? Any comments? Bob?
Yeah, well, you know how I look at things. I was thinking this would be an interesting place to have some interpretive signage about climate change and the ecology, and maybe bringing in some sort of ecology theme to it. That's why I was wondering if there are some Friends of the Creek or something like that that might help you with that. But, that's, I don't know, it's just a thought for you guys. That's all I have.
Hey, Bob, thanks for bringing that up, because this trail, the Belmont Trail, Creek Trail, is a really great counterpoint to the Redwood Shores Lagoon, which is a much more urban place. And so you cross the road and you get into this sort of gentler, softer landscape, and I think it would be terrific to see if there is some sort of interpretation of, what is the wildlife presence in Belmont Creek. And we saw the picture with the ducks. I'm sure there's a lot more going on in addition to the ducks. But it is something that I think could become, a very a highly valued place for people to come and enjoy nature in a very different way than you can across the road.
Yeah, because it makes such a nice, like if you were doing a little run or like a walk, you could do this really great loop and come back on this trail. I think that connection across the street is just fantastic, having that connection across Keen Dolphin and making that really public.
And to that point, I think the views, the clarity of the views across, into the new trail, the enhanced trail, I think all of that is going to draw people in, and it does feel public to me. I think the proponents have done, the team's done a very good job of maximising that. You know, I thought the comment about the existing trees and the number of the trees removed and the pine groves and so on, I mean, I think management of that, it seems like the team's put in some good thought on that, you know, not to crowd out and jam in too many trees. I think you know, having spaces to breathe between the tree clusters and views and sun and shade, I think all of that, as the design continues, you know, will be an important balance to continue to aim for.
Just on what Bob brought up, you know, it's not inside the limit of work, not inside part of the scope, but if there were a possibility of partnerships of some sort with people that are doing that work, to help make it go forward, that would really add value to your project. I mean, people would be much more excited to go out and run and walk around, you know, inside here if they can get into something that's really highly improved from an ecological standpoint. That's all.
Yeah, that is kind of where I was going. Thanks for picking up on that. Again, I'm not as familiar with this part of the peninsula as obviously the people working on the project are. But in other parts, there are people that would get really excited about maybe having something to do with this and helping with the planting or stewardship.
Okay, let's move to the next question. Are there additional considerations to improve the view corridors to the slough from the adjacent roadways? Any thoughts? For those online, we're just having a moment here. The lights went off in the room, so we are reactivating the lights. Yes, well, yes. The creek, yeah. Yes, that's just how the question is written. Any comments on view corridors? Does it seem? Yeah, I think the proponents have given good thought to it. Yeah.
Did you get an answer to your question about the difference between the slough and the creek? Or sorry, the lagoon and the creek?
I think we did. I think the slough and the creek are the same. I think is what we're assuming, and that makes sense because it's somewhat tidally influenced creek. We see a slough is a correct term, I believe. So,
correct.
Thanks.
And the lagoon is the big body of water.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so next question, does the design provide legible connections from adjacent roadways that will draw users into and through the site to the Belmont Creek Trail? I think we've made some comments on this already, but if there's anything else people would like to add? I think we've received quite a lot of detail on this in the presentation, so, and I think it's very well handled. I really would congratulate the team on the thought they put into it. Well, the final question, are there sufficient public access improvements and seating opportunities along the trail to serve both public users and employees who work at the site? I'm just going to jump in on that. I made a note in the presentation. I always appreciate it when the design teams propose some sort of custom furnishings. In this case, it looked very interesting, some more natural types of furnishings, but I really do think that you need to keep it balanced with accessible requirements, and so, while there may be some furnishings like that, make sure that there are, some benches with armrests and places where people who may not be able to have a level of mobility that really fit people do, to be able to come in and enjoy it. So I just would ask to keep a balance as the design progresses on that. I don't know how many employees there will be at the site, but I think this will be a popular place, and so, don't hold back on adding another bench or two if, at appropriate points, if you feel like that would improve the ability for people to sit and enjoy. And I really think people who work in this development will walk outside and sit outside and enjoy the, lunch, enjoy this environment. It will be very attractive. Any other comments on question 5? Okay. Well, hearing none, I think that wraps up our board discussion comments. I won't run through all the points. I know the team staff are making notes, but would the project team or a member of the team just like to make a response, brief response? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all your comments. Really helpful. I think we're just as excited as you are about transforming the area. It's not just a great amenity for the project, but for the entire Redwood Shores community. You made a good point, Bob, about the interpretive signage. The Redwood Shores Public Library is just up north and has some great signage along the creek, and I think that's a great place to start and see if we can extend that on our site. So thanks for the suggestion. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the team coming in person to the meeting. It makes a big difference to us, so thank you. Okay. Ashley, you'll want to know if we would like to see the project again. I don't think so. But we will look forward to coming down and seeing the trail when it's
Can I make
built. So please let us know when it.
Jacinta, can I make a quick
yes, please.
thought? I think just to the extent that the finish elevations of the site are not really known because because it hasn't been measured, I think we would sort of trust you to bring anything back to us that was that you felt like you needed some additional input on, and I just wanted to sort of point that out.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that too, the sea level rise adaptation strategy or plan isn't done yet, obviously. So, if staff wants us to, comment on that, then I think that might be a reason. I'm not sure we have to see it, as far as I'm concerned. But
well, actually, could I say this? That let's make sure this is in the record with you. That once you see those plans, if you think we should see it again, that specific aspect of the project, because we haven't seen the level of detail that we expect to see in that area. So if there are concerns, please bring the project back to us. But otherwise, we don't need to see the project.
Yeah, can I make a brief comment too? Go ahead, Steph. Yeah, I was just going to say I really appreciate the sensibility of this project too, but I also feel like there was a lot of very detailed verbal information that was provided and a lot of text on the drawing, and I didn't follow all of that, so I would just say to the staff, in terms of understanding those details, to look into all those things. I think a lot of it kind of went by me, but from what I did understand, I like it a lot. I think it really shows what you can do in a very narrow strip of land.
Actually, is that clear? Okay, great. Well, that moves us to the last item, which is adjournment of the meeting. And just before we make a motion, I want to thank Ashley. Thank you very much, and all the team. These are challenging meetings, and Ashley, you've stood in really well for Andrea, so thank you. And thank everyone else for being here in person and online. We appreciate everyone joining the meeting. So that concludes our review for the meeting. I would like to entertain a motion and a second to adjourn our meeting. So
I will make a motion. I will make a motion. Yep. I will second the motion.
Moved by Gary, second by Andrew. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Good night.